Jen Suying first met Liu in his own living room. As he entered the door with a cigarette in his mouth, he saw Jen Suying and a boy sitting on the sofa. The two were playing with a basketball. Hearing the door open, the two chatting on the sofa turned their heads in unison. The moment Jen Suying and the boy made eye contact, he suddenly found himself unable to move. At that moment, there's a saying called love at first sight, which precisely described his feeling of being attracted at first sight. In short, his heart raced, and the veins on his forehead throbbed. Seeing him, Jen Suying hurriedly said, "Brother, you're back. This is my classmate, Liu, the grandson of the old chief." Jen Suying exclaimed he had never met him before. His brother replied that Uncle Li had been transferred to another province before, and had just returned this year. They had known each other since childhood but had not seen each other for a long time. Jen Suying suppressed his excitement, trying to keep his face calm as he walked over and stretched out his hand with a smile. "The grandson of old Li, then you should call me brother." Liu's expression was quite indifferent, but not impolite. He shook hands lightly, nodded, and called him Brother Jen. Jen Suying's fondness for him grew. The firm and supple muscles in his hand made his heart flutter. He deliberately patted Liu's back, saying, "You just finished playing soccer, don't turn the air conditioning too low. Your clothes are still wet, you might catch a cold." Jen Suying, rarely seeing his brother so amiable, quickly picked up the remote control and turned up the temperature. Jen Suying then asked Aunt Wu to prepare a meal for the two young men. By chance, Aunt Wu was not around. Seeing his brother in a good mood, his brother decided to show off his cooking skills, heading straight to the kitchen to make a dish of spicy eggplant. As soon as the others left, only Liu and Jen Suying were left, staring at each other. Liu felt somewhat awkward, while Jen Suying enthusiastically patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "What are you standing there for? Sit." Liu smiled politely and sat down. Jen Suying also sat next to him, gazing at his smooth cheeks and distinct features, almost wishing he could pin him down on the sofa right then, strip off his jersey, and have his way with him. Jen Suying managed to keep a normal expression on his face and asked in the tone of an elder brother, "The college entrance exam is just around the corner. Are you able to adapt after transferring schools?" Liu gave a non-committal answer, "I can adapt," but his gaze couldn't help drifting towards the kitchen. Jen Suying lit a cigarette, looked at Liu, and offered with a smile, "Want one?" Liu refused. Not catching on, Jen Suying observed his porcelain-like face, noticing his indifferent and aloof expression. But he wasn't blind. It was clear to him that Liu wasn't much interested in engaging with him. No wonder, since he was a friend of Jen Suying, who knows what that guy might have said about him. It would be strange if his friends were to take a liking to him. But the more it was like this, the more challenging it became. Jen Dashao indeed liked those who played hard to get. He pretended not to see the embarrassment in Liu's eyes, continuing to make conversation. "So, your name is Liu, huh?" Liu answered, "You, as in Jade." Jen Suying teased, "Isn't that a girl's name?" Liu dropped his gaze and didn't respond. "That's a nice name. It would be awkward for any other guy, but it suits you and sounds better the more I think about it." Jen Suying's tone was already somewhat flirtatious. It was unclear if Liu noticed. "Did I ever see you when I was a kid? How old were you when you left? If you were as handsome as you are now, I definitely wouldn't have forgotten. How are your grades? What school do you plan on applying to?" A barrage of questions made Liu visibly impatient, but out of politeness, he couldn't just get up and leave. Jen Suying, thick-skinned as ever, became even more enthusiastic the more Liu ignored him, continuing to make small talk. "You guys are fine." As he spoke, he took the opportunity to pat Liu's back, feeling the vigorous young muscles. "Exercise more." At this moment, Liu felt extremely embarrassed and wanted to help in the kitchen, but was pulled back by Jen Suying to continue the inquiry. "Does Shaolin have a girlfriend?" Liu could only shake his head. "If he does, you have to tell me. It's for his own good." "Brother Jen, he really doesn't have one," Liu said firmly. "Then do you have a girlfriend?" This was actually what Jen Suying really wanted to ask. What did it matter to him if Liu had a girlfriend or not? Feeling really uncomfortable, Liu had no choice but to say, "I don't have one either." Jen Suying was quite happy inside. Seeing that it was enough, he stopped pestering Liu. The impatience in Liu's eyes was already undeniable. In fact, Jen Suying wasn't someone who would annoy people upon first meeting. Unfortunately, as Jen Suying's friend, Liu naturally didn't favor him. Jen Suying knew when to stop. Annoying him further would be counterproductive. "You sit here, I'll go check the kitchen." Saying that, he got up and went to the kitchen. Liu finally breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as Jen Suying entered the kitchen, He saw his younger brother wearing an apron and cooking with a focused expression. Leaning against the doorframe, Jen Suying casually said, "How's it going?" "Almost done, but the smoke is pretty heavy." Jen Suying walked over to him and, looking into the pan, remarked, "Smells good." Shaolin had been teased by his brother since childhood. Hardly ever received such gentle treatment, he didn't know how to respond. Jen Suying said nonchalantly, "With Lee's grandson parachuting in like this, the girls at your school must be going crazy." "Yeah, on the first day, they ran to our classroom to see him. The hallway was packed with girls." For some reason, Jen Suying felt a bit proud. "I'll call him," he said quickly. Soon, 3 dishes and a soup were placed steaming on the table. Li Yu and his younger brother sat down together, finally looking a bit more relaxed. Jen Suying took out a bottle of fruit wine with a relatively low alcohol content, just right for the kids to have a sip and liven up the mood. Jen Suying didn't react much. Li Yu glanced at the wine glass and said, "Brother Jen, I don't drink." He pushed the wine glass towards Li Yu with a laugh. "What's there not to drink about? How can a man not drink? Don't worry, this has a very low alcohol content. Even my dog can drink it with no problem." Li Yu frowned slightly. "Brother Jen, we still have classes in the afternoon. It's not a big deal, come on, give your brother some face." A flash of displeasure crossed Lin Yu's eyes, but she didn't say anything. She picked up her glass and took a sip. Jen Suying laughed and said, "You little girl, men should drink in big gulps. Come on, Xiao Lindsay, show him how it's done." Jen Suying grabbed the glass and downed half of it in one gulp, but he drank too quickly and choked. "It's fine," he coughed with a red face. Li Yu quickly patted his back and asked if he wanted water. Jen Suying waved his hand, and Jen Suying lifted his cup to Li Yu's eyes. "Come on, have a drink with your brother." Li Yu helplessly raised his glass, clinked it with Jen Suying's, and then took a rather decent sip. Jen Suying watched Li Yu's reluctant little looks and felt a twisted sense of pleasure. Young Master Jen started picking food contentedly and tapped the shrimp plate with his chopsticks. "Xiao Lindsay, peel some shrimp for your brother." Jen Suying put down his chopsticks and honestly started peeling the shrimp. Li Yu's hand paused, and he glanced at Xiao Lin's hands. Such beautiful hands, why not do something more worthwhile, Li Yu thought. But as it was someone else's family affair, he couldn't interject and had to hold back. The Jen brothers, however, were used to it. Jen Suying peeled the shrimp cleanly and put them into his brother's bowl. Then he started eating again. After the meal, it was almost time for them to go to school. "Let's go, I'll take you to school," said Jen Suying, glancing at Li Yu with difficulty, signaling, "Brother, we want to take a shower first, we're too dirty from playing basketball." "Then go, I'm not in a hurry." Jen Suying has never been this patient with his brother. The suggestion made Jen Suying quite uncomfortable. "I'll go take a shower, Li Yu, wait for me upstairs, I'll be quick." Jen Suying said to Li Yu, "You use the bathroom in my room, it'll save some time." Li Yu was extremely reluctant, but couldn't find a reason to refuse, so he followed Jen Suying upstairs. After he entered his room, the sound of water soon followed. Jen Suying stared at that thin door, her mind filling with indecent fantasies. This was a true test of willpower. Li Yu showered quickly and then asked Brother Jen for clothes. Jen Suying, holding the prepared clothes, walked over and couldn't help but glance at him as she handed them over. Jen Suying completely lost her composure at the sight, but no matter how flustered she felt, she didn't dare make a move. Li Yu, busy with taking the clothes, didn't notice Jen Suying's brazen gaze. Looking at Li Yu's sturdy figure, Brother Jen couldn't help but fall into a fantasy. Then, upon reaching the garage, Li Yu's expression changed. Jen Suying was secretly delighted. There isn't a man who doesn't love cars. She patted Li Yu, asking which one he liked. He hesitated. "Whichever you find convenient. You pick which one to drive today." Jen Suying said this and naturally placed her hand on Li Yu's shoulder. Xiao Lin's body stiffened, and he pursed his lips, quickly averting his gaze. Li Yu casually pointed at the Maserati. "That one. Let's go with it. Young Master Jen has a fine taste." After dropping the two off, she also opened the door and got out of the car. Li Yu's face, however, looked quite unpleasant. After saying goodbye to Jen Suying, he quickly disappeared into the crowd. Watching Li Yu's retreating figure, young Master Jen licked her lips. That night, he vented his frustrations on the fair-skinned boy in the hotel. While his body was exhausted, he still felt unsatisfied. He wished it was that indifferent, handsome young man beneath him. However, no matter how beastly Jen Xiao was, he didn't plan to make a move on Li Yu just yet. The college entrance exam was less than 2 months away. The child had been studying diligently for over a decade. Since he couldn't afford to disrupt him now, it was best not to mess with anyone from the old Lee family. He was their treasure. If the old Lee family found out, he wouldn't be able to stay in town. He stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray and stopped thinking about it. Maybe in a few days, he'd forget what Li Yu even looked like. Why was he so conflicted? For 3 weeks straight, Jen Suying didn't go home and had almost forgotten about Li Yu. It was just then that his father happened to visit and sent him a WeChat message to come home for dinner and to pick up his younger brother on the way. So he had no choice but to leave work early to pick up Jen Suying from school. Not far from the school gate was a basketball court. He immediately spotted Jen Suying and the nearby Li Yu. His heart skipped a beat. From a distance, Lin saw him and quickly ran over, flashing a toothy grin. "Bro, you're here." Jen Suying glanced at him briefly, his gaze soon drifting to Li Yu. Li Yu executed a beautiful 3-step layup, then tossed the ball aside, his eyes eventually setting on their side. He paused, then also ran over. Jen Suying's attention was entirely captivated by him. The longing for Li Yu that he had suppressed for this time surged back at the sight of him, spreading like wildfire. As the group prepared to set off, seeing that Li Yu was also going, young Master Jen secretly rejoiced. He asked his brother if Li Yu was going as well. The brother replied, "Yes, and he has invited other classmates as well. But first, Li Yu will come home with us for a meal." Jen Suying was about to ask how many classmates he had invited and why, when Li Yu, sensing his intention, replied in a somewhat cold tone, "Today is Sui Lin's birthday." Jen Suying's indifference left the conversation without a follow-up. The three of them returned home each preoccupied with their own thoughts. As soon as the brother entered, all eyes were on him. "Try this," Jen Suying offered, cutting the first slice of cake. The main topic of conversation at the dinner table was centered around Jen Suilin, which Jen Suying found exceedingly dull. After the meal, Li Yu took out a gift that caught Jen Suying's attention. Unexpectedly, it was the same model of cell phone as his own. Jen Suying had thought that Li Yu, being such a spirited beauty, would have something creative to give, and couldn't help feeling somewhat disappointed. Having lost all interest in staying here, Jen Suying also pulled out a checkbook from his pocket, filled in an amount, tore it off and handed it to his younger brother as a coming-of-age gift. Their father, who happened to be beside them, glanced at the check and disapproved, saying, "Suying, you could have chosen a gift for your brother. What's a teenager going to do with so much money? It's not appropriate." Jen Suying, unconcerned, replied, "He's of age now, he should know how to spend money." Disinterested in picking out a gift for that woman's son, Yuli snorted. Disappointment flickered in the little brother's eyes as he had wanted to give something to his brother. Lin Yu spoke up, "Today is your coming of age. It wouldn't be good to leave. Tomorrow is your birthday. Stay here, and I'll accompany your brother." Jen Suying couldn't have asked for anything better, so they both headed to the parking lot. In a place with no one around, Li Yu quietly said to Jen, "Brother Jen, you don't know that today is Sui Lin's birthday, do you?" "I forgot," Jen Suying replied nonchalantly. Li Yu looked up. "Today, you didn't even say happy birthday to him." Jen Suying couldn't remember if he had said it or not but thought it didn't really matter since he had come in person and given a red envelope. Li Yu coldly stated, "Sui Lin has always admired you." Saying it to him today, in person, would mean more than any gift. Unaccustomed to such sentimental narratives, Jen Suying felt he had overestimated Li Yu, laughing it off. "Admiration, eh?" About to add something else, he swallowed his words. "Let it be. Our relationship isn't the same as yours with your brother," Li Yu persisted. "Brother Jen, at least send him a text wishing him a happy birthday." Amused by the suggestion, the young master took out his phone and texted Jen Suilin, "Happy birthday, little Lindsay, from your brother." Almost instantly, he received a reply, "Thanks, brother. I'm really happy you could come today." With a smile that wasn't quite a smile, Jen Suying looked at Li Yu, asking, "Satisfied?" Li Yu nodded, looking extremely happy. 2 weeks later, young Master Jen's busy schedule consumed him entirely. But after the meeting with the student council, Jen Suying couldn't forget Li Yu. His mind constantly pictured Li Yu, and he even started to pay rare attention to the students' exam schedule, looking forward to hanging out with Li Yu after the exams. Finally, he couldn't resist anymore. He turned the steering wheel and drove to the school. From the basketball court, he heard some shots and the sound of balls bouncing. He looked around but didn't see any familiar faces. Jen Suying laughed at himself, thinking it was like shooting a TV drama. Under the intense work pressure, he hoped for a companion who could truly make him relax and be happy. This companion should ideally look like his dream person, someone he could never get tired of looking at. That's why he did something so foolish, standing on a high school basketball court, hoping for a melodramatic encounter. Unfortunately, he didn't run into anyone. Just as Jen Suying was about to leave, he heard an uncertain call behind him, "Jen Ge." The voice pierced his heart. Jen Suying felt his breath stop, and an indescribable feeling surged in his chest. He turned around abruptly, seeing the boy he liked standing behind him, drenched in sweat, with a post-exercise flush on his face. Li Yu smiled a bit shyly, shook his wet clothes, and said it was too hot. Jen Suying suddenly realized it was indeed very hot today. He asked why Li Yu was still at school. At that moment, Li Yu's classmate ran over and asked, "Bro, want to join us for basketball? We're short one person for a 3-on-3. Jen Suying thought this kid had good timing and rolled up his sleeves to join. Li Yu looked at him with interest and said, "Jen Ge, can you play basketball in those shoes and pants?" Jen Suying glanced at his tailored suit pants and shiny leather shoes and said, "It doesn't matter. I used to be on the school team." Jen Suying bent down, and the stance was set. Several boys gathered around, and the 3-on-3 game started. Li Yu was on the opposing team. The outfit that Jen Suying is wearing is somewhat cumbersome. Coupled with his mind wandering, it's easy for him to get distracted. In a blink, he finds Li Yu's face shockingly close in front of him. Jen tries to dodge quickly, but his movements are too slow and he fails. Jen and Li Yu collide almost head-on, with the big guy running full speed into him. One can imagine it wasn't pleasant. Jen Suying is knocked directly to the ground, immediately feeling dizzy. Then, Li Yu ends up lying on top of him, eliciting a cry of pain. The scene becomes somewhat chaotic for a moment as people help Jen Suying to the spectator seats. Li Yu, a bit anxious, asks Jen how he is doing, self-mockingly commenting that he's really not up for this at his age, getting injured with just a bit of activity. Li Yu crouches in front of him, taking off his shoes and socks, and looks worriedly at his swollen ankle. Jen Suying, feeling somewhat nervous for some reason, tries to pull his foot back, saying it's nothing. However, Li Yu holds onto his foot without letting go, glances at him, and says, "It's the right foot. How will you drive?" After saying that, he stands up and offers, "Let me take you back." Jen Suying thinks to himself that this is a blessing in disguise. The sprain was worth it. Li Yu drives into the underground parking of his apartment. After opening the door and getting out, he helps Jen from the passenger side. At this point, Jen is somewhat inclined to take advantage of the situation, pretends to be unable to exert force, and leans on Li Yu. One can imagine the weight. As soon as Li Yu gets him out of the car, he starts sweating. Jen's supposedly weak foot accidentally trips himself, nearly falling, and ends up unabashedly hugging Li Yu's waist. Li Yu says, "Jen, it's too hot, don't cling to me," but that's not how Jen sees it at all. In his heart, he's thinking, "This waist is really slim, this neck is so tempting, I really want to take a bite." Li Yu doesn't know the vile thoughts inside the seemingly upright young master Jen's heart, and sends him home out of reason and sentiment. Jen Suying lives in this 28-story apartment building. His stomach starts growling in the elevator, and he gazes eagerly at Li Yu. After Li Yu enters the apartment, he glances around and sees only instant noodles in the fridge. Jen Suying comfortably leans back on the sofa, smiling at him. "I'll eat whatever you make." Watching him with amusement, she said, "I'll eat whatever you do." While boiling water, Jen Suying didn't let him be idle. "Li Yu, help me out. I want to take a bath and change my clothes." Li Yu helped him into the bathroom as Jen Suying started to undress. Li Yu was momentarily stunned. Jen Suying was quite confident in his physique. The only question was whether Li Yu had any interest in men. So, as he slowly unbuttoned, he observed Li Yu's face for any reaction. Unexpectedly, when his shirt came off, there was no expression on Li Yu's face. Feeling a bit disheartened, Jen Suying called out, "Help me, I need to take my pants off." Li Yu supported his arm, and in a few moves, Jen Suying's pants dropped to his feet. Li Yu's expression changed slightly. He wondered if it was a trait inherited from the Jen family. Jen Suying had it too, but despite his attractive exterior, his character was truly lacking. Li Yu couldn't hold back any longer and whispered, "Brother Jen, the water is boiling. I'll go check on it." Jen Suying glanced at him and noticed his eyes darting away, thinking he saw a hint of something. He was even less inclined to let him leave now. Sweat appeared on Li Yu's forehead again. He always felt that Jen Suying was deliberately teasing him, yet he also thought he might be overthinking it. At that moment, Jen Suying deliberately leaned in close, his bare body pressing against Li Yu, his lips lightly grazing Li Yu's cheek. Watching Li Yu's ears turn red, he thought this kid was just too adorable and enticing, possessing both the innocent shyness of a youth and the steady calm of a man. not to mention his handsome looks. Where else could you find such a rare gem? The bathtub was ready, and at that moment, Jen Suiying made up his mind, enjoy the pleasures of the moment, the bath is ready. No matter whose grandson he was, the bath was ready, and he couldn't let it go. With seemingly newfound strength, Li Yu half lifted, half carried Jen Suiying into the tub, and almost fleeing from the bathroom, Jen Suiying laughed at the sight of his retreating back, mouth askew. Indeed still a child, he thought. The time when he could pin this youngster down and shower him with affection didn't feel far off. Jen Suiying took a comfortable bath and waited for Li Yu to come, but he didn't show, probably frightened by him. He slowly dried himself off before calling out for Li Yu to bring his bathrobe. Li Yu's eyes were still dodgy, not daring to look at him directly as he handed over the bathrobe. Jen Suiying teased him on purpose, "Why are you acting like a shy little girl? Whatever I have, you have too. What are you shy about?" Li Yu frowned, wanting to retort, but then he realized that whatever he said, he'd still be the one embarrassed. Amused, Jen Suiying laughed heartily. "How's this physique? The muscles look good, right? I have to work out at least twice a week. They don't just come naturally." While putting on his bathrobe, he whispered in Li Yu's ear, "Do you know which part of a man is most important to train?" Li Yu said he didn't know. With a suggestive smile, Jen Suiying said, "The waist is the most important. You'll understand eventually. Tell me the truth, have you ever slept with anyone?" Jen Suiying was inwardly laughing at the kid. He didn't know before how amusing it could be to tease a youngster. Li Yu took a deep breath. "Brother Jen, if it weren't for getting hurt because of me. But you said to relax. If it weren't for you being Jen Suiying's brother, I would have left long ago." Now he truly doubted what this frivolous and boring person could possibly have in common with Jen Suiying. Finally dressed, Jen Suiying was helped by Li Yu to the table. "Brother Jen, you eat." "I should go," Li Yu said stiffly. "My mom is waiting for me to have dinner at home." Jen Suiying was somewhat disappointed. He regretted getting carried away in his teasing. How nice it would have been if Li Yu could have stayed to keep him company. Jen Suiying twisted her ankle and didn't feel like going to work. Upon hearing from Li Yu that his sister had injured her foot, the brother decided to visit. He didn't refuse and also invited Li Yu to come along. Their father suggested that the brother bring everything needed as it was close to the examination site, so, Li Yu and Jen Suiying went to the brother's place. "Has it been cured?" The bell rang, instantly lifting Jen Suiying's spirits. "No need." The brother insisted on seeing her foot. "No need." Initially, Jen Suiying was reluctant, but then she thought showing her swollen ankle might make Li Yu feel guilty. Thus, she boldly placed her foot on the sofa. Jen Suiying rolled up his trouser leg, took out a bottle of oil from his bag, grabbed her ankle, and started massaging it from light to heavy pressure. Li Yu, sitting beside, felt uncomfortable no matter how he sat. He didn't understand why Suiying was so nice to such a brother. Just 2 hours ago, he was still bringing crayfish for his brother. As Jen Suiying's hand applied more pressure, Jen Suiying couldn't help but grit her teeth in pain. The brother was almost coaxing her, "Can you bear with it a little longer, please?" Jen Suiying, unable to bear the pain, kicked out. The brother fell to the ground. Li Yu couldn't stand it anymore, stood up angrily, and said to Suiying that he was only trying to help. What was she doing? At his words, both were stunned. The Jen siblings were used to this kind of interaction, one willing to endure, the two accustomed to it. Jen Suiying felt somewhat embarrassed and softly called out for Li Yu. Realizing his overreaction, Li Yu sat down with a frown. Jen Suiying furrowed her brow, not knowing why he was angry. Thinking it over, Li Yu was actually quite loyal. Jen Suiying naturally took out the crayfish, planning to peel it for her brother and also invited Li Yu to sit down. Jen Suiying had always loved eating spicy crayfish, and so did her mother. Her father, Jen Dongyuan, was different. He found such things unclean. Often, it was over such trivial matters that her parents would start arguing. Later, Jen Dongyuan had an affair, and afterward, her mother passed away. Jen Dongyuan then brought Jen Suiying's mother into their home, which made Jen Suiying, as a child, hate that woman and her father immensely. How rebellious was she back then? She would do anything that was disgraceful or made her father upset. It's a miracle that she didn't kill Jen Suiying and that Jen Dongyuan didn't beat her to death. So now, Jen Suiying skillfully wraps the shrimp while the young master eats them one after another. Jen Dashao keeps eating one after another. Then, his brother commands to wrap one for Li Yu as well. Li Yu, with a stern face, insists on doing it himself, saying, "Let me do it. Don't bother, it's hot." Li Yu speaks expressionlessly, "I prefer to do things myself." He suddenly tears off the shrimp head. The cat, feeling a simmering anger inside, is particularly annoyed by Jen Suying's directions to Jen Suilin. Jen Suying seems not to catch the sarcasm in his words, saying, "You two eat less. It's too spicy, I'm worried about your stomachs. Make sure you're in good condition tomorrow. Don't get an upset stomach." Jen Suilin nods and laughs, "Bro, don't worry, I'm not nervous." Jen Suying also cracks a smile, "Not nervous." Li Yu shakes his head, feeling indifferent, "Not bad, somewhat gutsy. So, do well in the exam tomorrow. If you can pass the workers' exam." Jen Suilin looks at him with some expectation, "If you pass, tell me what you want, and I'll agree to it." "Thanks, brother," the younger brother happily responds. Jen Suying then turns to Li Yu, "Where do you guys want to go after the exams?" Li Yu doesn't reply. He looks forward to the summer vacation that's about to start. Spending it with Jen Suying would be wonderful, but he really doesn't want to see Jen Suying. The three of them eat and drink, and time flies. That night, Jen Suying and Li Yu sleep over at Jen Suying's place. The next day, they take a taxi to the exam venue. For the first time, Jen Suying does what a brother should do, picking up his brother from the college entrance exam. Of course, the main purpose wasn't just for him. As soon as they reach the street of their school, he starts feeling overwhelmed and decides to walk to the school gate, looking around aimlessly. Just as he heard someone behind him calling him Mr. Jen, he turned his head and saw, coincidentally, it was none other than Li Yu's elder brother, Li Xuan. What a coincidence. He wasn't particularly close to Li Xuan, but under the scorching sun, amidst the crowds, it was quite an event. The two, sharing the same purpose, met unexpectedly. To some extent, this encounter brought them closer. They even talked about the Beihai project. Soon, Jen Suying saw at the school gate a fair, handsome young man with rosy lips and white teeth. He was even more excited than Li Xuan, shouting, "Li Yu! Li Yu!" From a distance, Li Xuan was startled by him, giving him a strange look. Li Yu paused, then turned to see Jen Suying waving at him. Next to him stood his elder brother. Li Yu smiled at his brother and hurried over, saying that he did not do too badly on the test. The two-day national college entrance examination ended quickly. On the afternoon it ended, when Jen Suying went to pick someone up, he found out that Li Yu had been picked up by a car arranged by the Li family. Although he felt somewhat disappointed, Jen Suying took his brother to the hotel. With only the four of them at the meal, he talked quite a bit of sweet talk. Aside from when Jen Dongyuan spoke, occasionally including Jen Suying, there was hardly anything to do with him. He just listlessly swirled his wine glass until his father suggested his brother in turn at his elder brother's company. Jen Suying was not pleased, saying the company did not need to feed any dead weight. If they really wanted to train him, let him wash dishes. Zhao Yan immediately sat up straight, looking almost pleadingly at Jen Dongyuan for help. Just when they were at a stalemate, Jen Suilin sincerely pleaded, "Brother, let me intern at your company. I'll start with cleaning if I have to." Jen Suying impatiently replied, "Who needs you to clean? Our company's cleaning staff earns 2,200 a month, which is pretty good. They support a child and a sick husband quite well. Are you going to take their job?" The supervisor's face immediately changed. It was obvious that these words were meant to provoke. Jen Suying didn't bother arguing with his father. He stood up and said, "If you want to come, then come. I won't disturb your family dinner." After saying that, he turned and left. Jen Suying's eyes followed his departing figure, a hint of joy gradually appearing in his eyes. Feeling irritated, Jen Suying drove home. Whenever he thought of the three of them sitting together, his chest felt tight and uncomfortable. His expectations for Jen Suilin were simple: the less he saw of him, the better. But his father just wouldn't let things go the way he wanted, always pushing Jen Suilin towards him, trying to rekindle their brotherly bond. Jen Suying parked his car by the roadside. Feeling uneasy, he wanted to find someone to relax with. He took out his phone and looked at the familiar names, but at that moment, he couldn't quite recall their faces. When he scrolled to Li Yu, his hand paused. He invited Li Yu to hang out without his brother, but Li Yu coldly refused. Jen Suying was reluctant to hang up, adding hopefully, "If I bother you before you sleep, will you dream of me?" Li Yu didn't respond, and Jen Suying hung up disappointed. After resting at home for several days, quite a bit of work had piled up at the company. As soon as Jen Suying returned to work, he was busy for several consecutive days. However, he didn't forget about inviting Li Xuan to dinner. Despite scheduling with him for 2 days, Li Xuan was always too busy. Not wanting to seem too eager, Jen Suying stopped calling. He originally thought he would definitely not be able to see Li Xuan before he left, but unexpectedly, he received a call from Li Yu. When he saw the caller ID, it reminded me to believe in myself. Jen Suying felt his heart skip a beat twice. This was the first time Li Yu had called him. Li Yu's older brother is about to return to Guangxi soon and wanted to have a casual meal together. Jen Suying was naturally happy to hear Li Yu's invitation and arrived at the restaurant half an hour early, only to be told that Li Xuan couldn't make it. The meal was to be hosted by Li Yu instead. Jen Suying's eyes lit up, and he quickly agreed. Seeing that there was still time, Jen Suying went to the restroom to comb his hair for a long time. Li Yu arrived on time. Hearing the knock on the door, Jen Suying adjusted his sitting posture, pretended to look at his phone, and hurriedly welcomed Li Yu when he came in. Faced with such a sunny young man, Jen Suying naturally chose to forgive. He directly ordered a big table of dishes to greet and then anxiously asked why his brother didn't come. Jen Suying was slightly startled, wondering why he should come. He also felt that Li Yu was somewhat distracted, so he asked Li Yu what his plans were after the exam. Li Yu, having heard that Su Ailin was going to intern at his brother's company, also wanted to go and asked if it was possible. Jen Suying was stunned, joy filling his heart for a moment. He couldn't ask for more than having Li Yu come. But after all, as a veteran in the business field, Jen understood a simple truth: the harder a fruit is to reach, the sweeter it is. He quickly pretended to be somewhat troubled and said, "Considering the relationship between you two brothers and me, this is really nothing, but you see, you're only 17 or 18 years old. Our company is particularly busy, and I'm very strict with my employees. Even employees who have been in the industry for several years sometimes can't stand it. It's not that I doubt your ability. I'm mainly worried that you'll suffer. Brother Jen, you're doing big business. I discussed it with my parents last night, and they also think I can learn a lot from you. I'm not afraid of hardship or suffering, just afraid you won't accept me." Jen Suying thought to himself, "I've liked you for 800 years already, but didn't dare to say it." Li Yu quickly thanked him, making Jen Suying very happy. He remembered he had a business trip coming up and thought it would be a great opportunity to bring Li Yu along. At that time, Jen Suying really didn't think much of it, assuming Li Yu just wanted to hang out with his brother. After the two had dinner, Jen Suying wanted to take Li Yu out for fun. A buddy had just opened a new bar, so they decided to go there today. Li Yu had no reason to refuse. Upon entering the bar, Jen Suying looked up and realized it was a gay bar. Seeing the place filled with men sticking close to other men, Li Yu realized everything immediately. Jen Suying was also quite embarrassed. It wasn't intentional to bring Li Yu here. Jen Suying leaned in and whispered, "I really didn't know it was like this here. Did it scare you? Let's not go in." Li Yu, with a smile that was not quite a smile, said, "We're already here, let's go in." Jen Suying looked at him surprisingly. Even Li Yu found it somewhat interesting. After a few drinks, Jen Suying grew bolder and leaned in to whisper, "What are you looking at? What do you find interesting?" Li Yu didn't say a word. Jen Suying said to Li Yu, "In the future, whether you want to do business or become an official, you can't avoid these occasions. You're not getting any younger. I'll take you out more often." Li Yu glanced at him and asked, "Brother Jen, do you often bring Su Ailin here too?" "Why would I bring him? It's no fun," Jen Suying replied. A hint of imperceptible sarcasm flashed in Li Yu's eyes. At that moment, Li Yu stood up, intending to go to the restroom. Jen Suying, a bit tipsy, grabbed his hand as he rose. Li Yu's extremely lucid and slightly indifferent gaze sobered Jen Suying up quite a bit, leaving him only able to chuckle. "I'll go too," just a bit hard to stand up, supporting his arm, lifting him up. When Jen Suying stood, he seemed to hear the words, "That's all the alcohol tolerance you have." He, Jen Dashao, surely had more tolerance than that. He might as well pretend to have just that much. "If you don't drink with me, I get drunk easily on my own. Carry me to the restroom," Jen Suying said. Li Yu laughed mockingly, "It's my fault now? Just drink less if you can handle it," Jen Suying replied. "Wait until I have the chance to show you what a real capacity for liquor is." Li Yu didn't stoop to his level and let go of his hand. "As long as you can stand, you should go by yourself." With that, he turned and headed toward the restroom. Jen Suying followed behind. When he came out of the restroom, he caught sight of Li Yu's back and thought to himself, "This kid is actually waiting for me. I'm too flattered." But he quickly realized something was wrong. Li Yu was blocked by a few people. A chubby man in his 30s, holding a bottle of alcohol, his face flushed from drinking, was looking at Li Yu with a silly grin, looking extremely sleazy. Jen Suying immediately understood what was happening. He saw the chubby man place his hand on Li Yu's shoulder and lean in as if to speak to him. Li Yu swatted his hand away with a wave. With a murderous look on his face, Jen Suying rushed over, thinking this fat jerk dared to touch his person. The chubby man's friends immediately pounced to rescue him. Jen Suying sprang forward and kicked a bespectacled man far away. The commotion quickly caught the attention of the security guards. Several tall and burly guards swiftly approached, smiling and asking, "Suying, how do you want to handle this?" Li Yu didn't say much, only that he wanted to go home. After such a scene, Jen Suying lost the mood to have fun. He carefully observed Li Yu's expression in the car. He felt their first date was a complete failure. From extremely noisy to extremely quiet, in the end, Jen Suying couldn't hold back his awkwardness and said, "That place is pretty pricey." "They saw you were young and thought you were?" Li Yu turned to face him, his gaze landing on his face. "Thought I was what?" His boldness was startling. Jen Suying felt a bit guilty under his gaze. Of course, he didn't dare say it directly and just laughed, "Mainly because you're too handsome. Even if you went to an ordinary bar, wouldn't girls still hit on you?" Li Yu's calm and serene gaze stayed on him for 2 or 3 seconds before slowly moving away. He asked, "Brother Jen, when does Suilin start work?" "Probably in a week or 2. My dad allowed him some time off." But then Li Yu said something unbelievable, "I want to start early." With Li Xuan visiting the company, we apologized to him again. We've given Jen Suying enough face. Then we discussed the land matter with Li Xuan. Jen Suying provided Li Xuan with some project-related materials. In the end, Li Xuan promised that after returning to Guangxi, he would help look for suitable land. With his word, Jen Suying felt much more at ease. Before leaving, he didn't forget to worry about his younger brother. Before leaving, she still worried about her brother, telling Jen Suying to take good care of him. Jen Suying, of course, was happy to do so. After the lunch break, Jen Suying stood up, looking at his beloved beauty with satisfaction. He asked what she had done that morning. Li Yu had toured the company and the canteen, and also reported to the HR department. Being new and inexperienced, she asked Jen Suying what she should do. Jen Suying proudly said, "Seeing you've just graduated from high school, there are many things I can't trust you with yet. Just stay by my side and handle some trivial matters, and you'll learn a lot. Consider yourself my assistant." This made Li Yu quite embarrassed, so she further inquired about what Suilin did. "Him? I'll arrange something," Jen Suying joked. "Why, aren't you happy?" "Who was it that said yesterday, 'I'll follow the leader's orders'?" Li Yu replied, "How could I not be? I will work hard." "There you go," Jen Suying patted his shoulder. "There you go, now to take the beauty shopping for clothes." Li Yu looked at him somewhat surprised and incredibly. The young master Jen had a penchant for beauty, full of self-confidence, and never settled for less. He couldn't bear to let his beloved beauty settle for less either. Actually, with a good figure and looks, pretty much anything looks good on her. So Jen Suying, eyeing some nice things, started to compare them against Li Yu. Li Yu, in a meticulously tailored suit with exquisite fabric, accentuated his glorious figure, making him even more sexy and enticing. Their distance was only about 20 centimeters. Young Master Jen truly experienced what it meant to have a mind full of wild thoughts and fantasies. As Jen Suying was joyfully pondering this, Li Yu suddenly asked how much was spent today. "I'll check with Sister Liang for the accounting and transfer the money to you as soon as possible." Jen Suying, like spoiling a child, insisted firmly on not taking the money. Li Yu turned his face, his expression somewhat cold, and slowly said, "Why should you pay for my shopping?" Jen Suying was stumped by the question. His mind cleared up a bit instantly. Upon closer inspection, it indeed seemed ambiguous. He suddenly realized the hint of love. His relationship with Li Yu was still quite superficial, and here he was, about to spend tens of thousands on him. Upon closer inspection, it indeed seemed too affectionate. He quickly glanced at Li Yu. Sure enough, seeing that his expression was a bit off, he quickly pretended as if nothing was amiss. "I, as a boss, am not being very strict with my employees. I just want to take care of you in advance. After all, following me, you'll have to run around a lot. You'll be extremely busy. You'll understand later." It wasn't until they reached the place to eat that Li Yu finally showed a good face. Jen Suying became even more attentive, keeping him company by picking food for him and pouring tea. After a few times, Li Yu felt embarrassed. It was awkward. Jen Suying, seeing that Li Yu was truly fine, then relaxed and mentioned that the cold mixed lettuce was particularly delicious, sweet and spicy. Upon trying it, Li Yu's face turned red from the spiciness, making his skin seem even more fair and tender. Jen Suying felt he could never get enough of looking at him. How could something he hadn't obtained yet be so enticingly fragrant? Indeed, it didn't take long for Li Yu to transfer the money to him, as if it burnt his fingers to keep it in his own account. Eager to please, yet the other party was not interested, leaving Jen Suying feeling somewhat frustrated. However,
He soon had no time to think about Li Yu as a project suddenly ran into an issue. Just when he thought all was lost, his phone suddenly rang. It was Jen Suying on the other line, who learned that Li Yu went to work. Sui Lin also wanted to go but was directly refused by his brother, who then hung up the phone. At that moment, good news arrived saying that the person in charge was available to meet for dinner that night. Jen Suying, seeing a chance for the project, felt somewhat invigorated. He wanted Li Yu to go with him to Qinhuangdao. Jen Suying hadn't slept well these past 2 days because of this. It might have been because the air conditioning was too high, waking up from the cold after just a short while and sneezing all the way. The more Jen Suying thought about it, the angrier he got. He ended up taking out his anger on the driver and even suggested that Li Yu help him block some drinks. Seeing his exhausted face, Li Yu felt somewhat surprised. Ever since he knew Jen Suying, this person has always been somewhat irresponsible and acted like a troublemaker. Today is the first time he saw him focused on work, barely reacting to anything else in the outside world. It's quite refreshing. At first, Li Yu was just listening absent-mindedly, but then he gradually turned his body around, his gaze slowly becoming focused. At dinner, Jen Suying forced himself to liven up, drinking alcohol as if it were plain water. Barely seeing the guests off, he couldn't hold on any longer and started vomiting while holding onto the table. Li Yu went to help him up. Jen Suying, with his mouth moving, mumbled about wanting to sleep. Li Yu half-dragged, half-carried Jen Suying into the room, with Jen Suying groaning in discomfort. Unfortunately, Li Yu hadn't forgotten that he is now his assistant. Leaving his boss in this state would be unacceptable the next day. Thankfully, this time was not like the last. Jen Suying had no energy to harass him. He managed to take off his outer clothes and pants smoothly. However, after taking them off, he couldn't help but glance a few times. Li Yu instantly tensed up, somewhat unable to accept it, and turned around to leave. Li Yu, Jen Suying called out in a daze. Li Yu turned back to see him tilting his head, looking at him, asking for a glass of water. Li Yu hesitated for a moment, then took out a bottle of mineral water from the fridge, helped Jen Suying sit up, and brought the bottle to his lips. Jen Suying took a couple of sips and pushed the bottle away. He ordered to buy a hangover cure. The young master Jen was used to ordering people around directly, and while he was sober, he restrained himself somewhat with Li Yu. Now, he had no scruples. In the middle of the night, who would be in the mood to buy him medicine? Li Yu was ready to throw him on the bed and be done with it, thinking he wouldn't remember his state the next day. So, he pushed him away, intending to leave. At this moment, Jen Suying was leaning crookedly, her head limp as she lay against Li Yu's shoulder. Li Yu was startled. After all, he was only a 19-year-old boy, and it was hard for him not to be nervous. With a sudden movement, he stood up and quickly left the room. The moment the door was slammed shut, Jen Suying slightly opened her eyes, revealing a smug smile. It's a pity that her limbs were truly weak. Unfortunately, my limbs are really weak. Otherwise, if I tried to be a hooligan after drinking, I might have been more successful. After getting up, young Master Jen quickly took a shower and then called Li Yu. Soon there was a knock at the door. The young master didn't expect it so soon. In a flurry, he took off his robe and threw it into the bathroom, then decided it was daring and sexy enough to open the door. As the door opened, Li Yu stood outside expressionless, with the always grinning driver Xiao Zhao beside her. Jen Suying thought about his current appearance and felt somewhat embarrassed even with his thick skin. Li Yu followed Jen Suying into the room. Young Master Jen asked Li Yu to go buy some clothes. Do you know my size? Jen Suying asked, then realizing how suggestive his words were, he looked at Li Yu teasingly. Li Yu just smiled lightly, casually glanced at his lower body, and said, I can guess. That indifferent glance, in Jen Suying's eyes, was full of allure. He was stunned for 2 seconds before coming back to his senses. Ever since Li Yu became his assistant, he really enjoyed every little thing she did for him. Then, the two of them set off grandly to go to his grandfather's place. Standing at the door, the old man looked sprightly. Stand up straight, he said, puffing on his pipe at the doorway. All right, no need to laugh as soon as you see them getting off the car, and don't tease Li Yu either. Today, we'll prepare a chicken stew. It's still early for dinner, I'll go pick some good-looking vegetables. You two go to the lake behind and fish a couple of fish. If the fish you catch aren't at least 4 pounds, you two are washing dishes tonight. Jen Suying laughed heartily. He took Li Yu to the lakeside and onto a colored speedboat. Li Yu looked at the expanse of green in the glittering lake, feeling a sudden sense of openness and comfort. She took a deep breath and felt refreshed. Jen Suying leaned back in his chair, squinting his eyes and enjoying the natural scenery. Li Yu didn't know how long it had been. When he felt drowsy, he suddenly heard Jen Suying shout in his ear, "It's hooked." Then he felt a force hit him. A more than 1 foot long, fat grass carp was twitching as it was reeled in. Jen Suying said, "It's indeed quite big." Li Yu also laughed and joked, "We don't have to wash the dishes now, right? This might not be 4 pounds yet, we still need to catch 2 more, Jen Suying said while trying to grab the slippery fish. The fish immediately jumped onto Li Yu's chest before he could dodge. His clothes and pants were soaked by the fish. He looked at his clothes in frustration. Jen Suying went to get a tracksuit for him to change into. Li Yu thought for a moment and decided to change. Jen Suying went into the cabin, took out the clothes, and handed them to Li Yu. Just as Li Yu was about to take them, Jen Suying pulled them back with a mischievous look. Li Yu's hand paused in midair as he looked at him questioningly. Jen Suying gave a wicked smile and asked, "Xiao Li, can you swim?" Li Yu took a step back. Jen Suying laughed and said, "It's so hot, how about a swim?" Li Yu looked at him defensively. Jen Suying showed a disappointed expression and handed him the clothes. Li Yu walked into the cabin and started taking off his clothes and pants. Jen Suying leaned against the cabin door, watching with relish. Li Yu felt embarrassed to stop, which would make him look pretentious. The young master Jen began to be a hooligan again, not only watching but also commenting, "Xiao Li, you have a great body. How do you train?" Li Yu stiffly replied, "I exercise." Jen Suying's gaze roamed freely over his body. Li Yu felt extremely uncomfortable being stared at and couldn't help but recall rumors he had heard about the eldest young master of the Jen family being gay. He felt a wave of awkwardness and offended anger, coldly looking at Jen Suying and saying he was a national second-level athlete. Jen Suying got even more interested. He wondered what Li Yu was practicing and ambiguously stretched out his hand. Li Yu revealed his white teeth and said with a grim smile that he practiced boxing. Jen Suying shivered and didn't dare to act rashly. At this moment, his phone rang. His grandfather called to ask if he was going to wash the dishes. After a bit of teasing, Li Yu was already sitting back in the chair, focusing on the lake. Once again, Jen Suying was stunned by his beauty. Li Yu slightly turned his head without a word, and his watery eyes glanced at him faintly. Jen Suying's heartbeat suddenly accelerated. In such a quiet and beautiful moment, with no one around, the ambiguous atmosphere was rising. It was the perfect time for something to happen. He thought, if only there was a chance for some close contact. Soon, the opportunity came. After dinner, young Master Jen finally got to share a room with Li Yu. It was a big step forward. His grandfather's place had no air conditioning for health reasons, so they had to endure it. Jen Suying was too confident in himself. He always felt that if he didn't use his body to tempt a little, it would be a waste of his great figure. He immediately went to take a shower. As the first time, the two were sharing a room, being so close to each other at night, Jen Suying felt it was necessary to take it seriously. After taking a shower, he shaved and did some grooming, then came out confidently wearing tight shorts that accentuated his figure. But Li Yu was already lying on the bed asleep. Jen Suying was so angry he almost spat blood. He went over and pushed him, waking him up to take a shower. Li Yu let out an impatient sigh and reluctantly propped himself up to walk towards the bathroom. After he entered the bathroom, young Master Jen walked around the bed. Then he took the glass of water from the table and splashed it onto the quilt, a mischievous smile appearing on his face. This way, the two of them could share the same blanket. When Li Yu came out, Jen Suying was sitting on the bed looking at his laptop. Li Yu noticed the thin quilt bundled up and thrown on the floor and felt puzzled. Young Master Jen explained that he had accidentally spilled water and that was the only thin one they had. "Let's make do with it," he said. Li Yu sized up the small blanket and looked a bit uncomfortable as he walked over, seemingly hesitant. Jen Suying patted the spot next to him on the bed and sneered, "Come on up." "What, are you afraid I'll eat you?" Li Yu felt more and more that Jen Suying's attitude towards him was overly strange, but he couldn't quite accept the idea that Jen Suying would harbor improper thoughts about him. Jen Suying had improper thoughts about him. Li Yu just closed his eyes, and Jen Suying came over to offer him water. He attentively pulled the edge of the blanket over Li Yu's stomach. Li Yu felt extremely awkward. Jen Suying's hand unintentionally brushed against his waist. After covering him with the blanket, they were even closer. Neither of them spoke, but in such a quiet place, they could clearly hear each other's breathing. Jen Suying felt increasingly hot, unable to calm down, with his mind in turmoil. Li Yu didn't feel much better either. He felt like he was lying on a bed of thorns, uncomfortable all over. He was hot and irritable, and suddenly sat up, wanting to get some fresh air. As soon as Li Yu moved, Jen Suying jumped up without thinking. Such a large movement would startle anyone. He forcefully tried to push Jen Suying away, but Jen Suying, with his temper, grabbed his arm even harder. This aggressive action completely angered Li Yu. He swung Jen's arm forcefully, causing Jen's body to make a clumsy arc in the air and fall directly onto the floor. As he fell to the ground, he didn't let go of Li Yu's arm, but instead pulled him down hard. Li Yu fell off the bed and landed on top of him. Jen screamed in pain from the fall and the pressure. In their struggle, Jen's feelings got out of control. A beam of moonlight through the window allowed them to barely see each other's bright eyes, one pair burning with anger and the other swirling with deep desire. At this moment, both of them regained some rationality. The room was extremely quiet. Li Yu stood with his back to Jen Suying, his body as motionless as a statue. It took him several seconds to finally speak in a flat voice, "Are you gay?" Jen Suying admitted it. Li Yu slowly turned his face. In the darkness, only his eyes were visible, particularly cold, so cold that it made him shiver. When he heard Li Yu ask, "Do you have feelings for me?" Jen Suying was completely sober. He had already lost face, so he felt a sense of reckless abandon and relief. So he admitted openly that he liked him. Li Yu gritted his teeth and said he wasn't gay. "No one said you were. Is it not okay for me to like you? From the moment I first saw you, I liked you." Upon hearing this, Li Yu strode towards the door. Jen Suying jumped up from the ground and quickly walked over to grab Li Yu. Li Yu immediately turned around as if he had been electrocuted, looking at him warily. Jen Suying was helpless and repeatedly apologized, reluctant to let him leave. He went to sleep in another room. Now it was over. The relationship that had been built up for so long was probably ruined. Originally, the two could still laugh and joke, but now they would likely face hostility. However, Jen Suying consoled himself. It might actually be better to be open about it rather than hiding and sneaking around. He had no patience for concealing his feelings all the time. Keeping his thoughts hidden every day would drive him crazy eventually. After seriously agonizing for a few hours, he finally fell asleep. The next day, he saw Li Yu chatting with Old Master Jen. He was relieved at this sight. There was hot tea steaming on the coffee table. Old Master Jen praised, "Old Li's grandson is amazing. He can talk about anything with someone my age and knows a lot." Jen Suying was worried about how to please Li Yu, so he quickly agreed, "Little Li is very smart and meticulous. He picks up things quickly and is very thorough." He then took a sip of tea, feeling a bit more at ease. Jen Suying, having hit a wall, said nothing more. He pondered how to keep Li Yu if he decided to turn against him. Old Master Jen reluctantly sent them off after lunch. After Xiao Zhao picked them up, Li Yu and Jen Suying sat one in front of the other in the 2 rows of the business van seats. The journey was silent, and as they were about to exit the highway, Jen Suying asked Xiao Zhao to stop at a gas station. Li Yu went to use the restroom. When he returned, Xiao Zhao was gone. Jen Suying was sitting in the driver's seat, smiling at him, repeatedly apologizing, and shamelessly asking Li Yu if he would give himself a chance. Never had he seen such a brazen person. Long Yun and Li Yu started making veiled sarcastic comments. When the flattering approach didn't work with Jen, who always wanted to keep Li Yu around, he provoked him by asking if he wanted to resign. Li Yu was taken aback by the question and hesitated for a moment. If he were to quit and go home less than 2 weeks into the job, his brother would definitely scold him for not being able to endure hardship, for being too sensitive and having too many issues. Not to mention feeling stifled, he feared that both Sui Lin and Suying would look down on him. Jen Suying himself had the temperament of a mule, preferring to suffer rather than be laughed at. Based on his understanding of Li Yu, who had once vowed to stick with any job, he knew that Li Yu would endure daily but would never quit halfway. The reason was simple: he couldn't afford to lose face. And just as he had expected, once they reached the city, Suying divided the fruits and vegetables from the trunk and gave some to Li Yu. With a flying kiss aimed at him, she then watched him with a playful smile. Li Yu was so angry his face turned green. 2 days later, Jen Suying felt like Li Yu was giving him the silent treatment, which was really quite adorable. Now, thinking of him made his mood especially good. Sometimes he laughed out loud by himself. Playing with his phone, he finally couldn't help it. Sent a text to Xiao Li, asking what he was doing. Waited for a long time with no response. Jen Suying sent another one, "Come to work tomorrow." Xiao Lin also got one. Still no reply, like a stone sinking into the sea. Jen Suying was a bit disappointed. The next morning, as soon as Jen Suying entered the company, he saw Jen Suying and Li Yu sitting inside. The two were chatting and laughing. The scene was so pleasing to the eye. Jen Suying couldn't help but feel a bit jealous. Li Yu's gentle and cheerful smile had never been given to him. He knocked on the glass a bit unhappily. The 2 people in the reception room looked up simultaneously. Both people in the reception room looked up at the same time, one with joy in their eyes, the other with a stiff expression. Then, Li Yu nodded and said seriously, "President Liang called me today, asking if you were free and wanted you to experience the hot springs at the property hotel." Young Master Jen immediately agreed and wanted to take Li Yu with him. But what about taking his younger brother? That was a problem. Just as Jen Suying was about to speak, the secretary rushed in and said that the cousin had arrived. President Jen's face twisted immediately, and he led the two back to the office to wait for the cousin. Soon, a handsome but somewhat slovenly young man came in. He was Jen Suying's maternal aunt's only son, named Zi Xinyu. Zi Xinyu always bragged about wanting to start a great business. Generally, when he came to Jen Suying, it was never good news. Sure enough, as soon as he sat down, he took out a project that was a disaster waiting to happen and showed it to his brother. Jen Suying, while tapping on the table and glaring at Zi Xinyu, and the young master eagerly watched them. After a while, Liu lifted his head and, taking a page from the documents, pointed out to Jen Suying that construction could not proceed on the land due to high voltage lines above, meaning the land was unusable. At this point, Jen Suying also lifted his head and said, "Brother, the property rights for this land aren't clear either." Jen Suying nodded in satisfaction, remarking on Zi Xinyu's lack of consideration. Zi Xinyu shrank his head, not daring to look at him for a long time. Zi Xinyu squeezed out a sentence, "Then it can't be done, right?" But his cousin said it could be done. He lifted his head joyfully, only to be suppressed by Jen Suying again. "I can do it, but you can't." Zi Xinyu was immediately dejected. Indeed, if fixed up, the land would be valuable. "How about this?" Li Yu and Xiao Lindsay just agreed. "I'll give you both a chance to exercise. You two help him with this land." Zi Xinyu doubted their capabilities, but to no avail. "This project will take at least a year and a half to complete. Have you two thought it through? If you want to take it on, there's no backing out halfway." Jen Suying immediately said, "I can do it." Li Yu promptly followed suit and agreed. Jen Suying was secretly delighted. This way, at least until the end of the project, Li Yu would have to stay connected with him. After assigning their respective duties, the three stood up to leave. Jen Suying suddenly said, "Li Yu, don't go. Come have lunch with me." Li Yu thought someone had invited Jen Suying to lunch. It turned out he didn't even call his driver. They arrived at a vegetarian restaurant, and as soon as they sat down, he started discussing business. When it came to business, he seemed like a different person, becoming much more serious. But when the food was served, it wasn't suitable to discuss business anymore. Jen Suying immediately reverted to his usual self, attentively serving Li Yu dishes and pouring drinks. After they finished eating, Jen Suying took a small velvet box out of his pants pocket, pushed it to Li Yu, and smiled deeply. "I saw this while shopping the other day and thought it suited you perfectly." Li Yu glanced at him and warned, "Don't try this trick, I won't accept it." Jen Suying wasn't upset at all and opened the box himself. Inside was a platinum tie clip inlaid with relatively low-key diamonds. This made Li Yu suppress his anger and say in a low voice, "Brother Jen, is it appropriate to use the same tactics you use to woo women on me? Young Master Jen is truly wronged. How can this be pleasing women? In this lifetime, aside from his mother, he hasn't pleased any woman. He was born bent." Jen Suying's resolution was, of course, to refuse closure. This meal made Li Yu feel awful. The next day, the younger brother and Li Yu went about their regular work report. The older brother thought the results were out, so he casually asked. Unexpectedly, Sui Lin did quite well on the exam. The big brother casually rewarded him with a car. Li Yu's grades were also good, so they planned to throw a party together. They invited classmates and friends. Of course, Jen Suying wouldn't miss any chance to interact with Li Yu outside of work time. He eagerly wanted to go and took care of all expenses, plotting how to get Li Yu drunk on the day. On the celebration day, Jen Suying had his secretary prepare dozens of gaming consoles to give to their classmates. Even if it wasn't to please Li Yu, it was to bring glory to the Jen family. Most of the attendees were young people, making the scene very lively. As soon as Jen Suying entered, Jen Suying came to greet him, looking all smiles. But the older brother's eyes were scanning around, directly asking where Li Yu was. "Over there," the younger brother pointed. Looking over, Li Yu was chatting with classmates and then laughed. It had been a long time since seeing Li Yu in casual clothes. His youthful and handsome look was really captivating. A group of boys gathered around, heckling. Among them were some who had played basketball together last time. Everyone laughed together. Jen Suying moved closer to Li Yu. A male classmate asked, "Big brother, is Li Yu interning at your company?" "Yes, he's doing well," the male classmate teased. "Big brother, don't overwork the handsome Li Yu, or our school beauty will be heartbroken." After saying that, he gave a suggestive glance at the girl sitting next to Li Yu. The girl angrily glared at him. Only then did Jen Suying notice. This little girl is pretty, which annoys the young master. He stared at the girl, examining her with his gaze. Deliberately teasing her, he said, "It's not easy being a beauty, having to get up early and follow me around everywhere." "I don't," she hurriedly denied, Sometimes I'm so busy I don't even have time for lunch. Don't you feel sorry for me? I don't. The girl's face turned so red it looked like she could bleed. She kept shaking her head, I don't. She didn't even dare to look at Jen Suying's face, her heart pounding as if it would jump out of her throat. Li Yu felt somewhat uncomfortable watching Jen Suying bully the girl, so he changed the subject. This made Jen Suying feel even more that Li Yu was protecting the girl. Jealousy intensified. He kept holding on to the girl even tighter. Continue, what do you think of my brother? The male and female classmates around them burst into excitement. Young people love excitement, don't they? As soon as he asked, what do you think of my brother? Everyone started to tease. The girl, with her thin skin, was so embarrassed she was about to cry. It almost made him cry from embarrassment. Jen Suying's fiery temper was on full display. He just wanted to set him up with little Lin. Seeing Jen Suying continue like this, Li Yu thought he might say something more, so he took the opportunity to pull Jen Suying away. Jen Suying was also fuming, thinking these two were definitely not innocent. Why does no one take care of this damn early romance? Li Yu pulled him outside and whispered, what exactly are you trying to do? Jen Suying's anger was almost through the roof. If you dare to try me, I guarantee you'll never want a woman again. Such a blatantly bold declaration made Li Yu's face flush red. Jen Suying was always able to catch people off guard so easily. His upbringing and consideration for Jen Suying's status held him back from saying anything nasty. Before he could finish his words, Jen Suying had already lunged forward. Catching him off guard, he pushed his chest against the wall and pressed his whole body against him, sealing his lips in an instant. After all, Li Yu was young and had never thought a man would kiss him forcefully one day. His mind went blank for a moment, stunned on the spot. In the next second, his mind cleared, and he opened his eyes wide, biting hard on that intruding tongue. Jen Suying recoiled in pain. Then, without any defenses, he felt a huge push against his chest, causing him to lose his breath and stumble back, falling to the ground. Li Yu, face filled with rage, rushed forward, grabbed his collar, and raised a fist. Jen Suying licked the blood from the corner of his mouth, provocatively looking at him. Li Yu's fist hung in midair. He hesitated. He was a professional athlete, and when angry, he couldn't control his strength. If he really hit him, Jen Suying's face wouldn't be presentable for half a month. How would he explain this to a room full of people? While he was hesitating, Jen Suying actually laughed and provocatively said, your lips are so soft and sweet. How was my kissing skill? Furious, Li Yu kneed him hard in the stomach. Jen Suying clutched his stomach, coughing and unable to recover for a long time. Wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, he revealed a smug smile. Young Master Jen savored the light and soft taste of those lips. He just couldn't understand what Li Yu found lacking in him. Suddenly, his phone rang. Picking it up, he was surprised to see Jen Suying calling. You there? Why would Jen Suying dare to call him at this time, looking for a scolding? He hurriedly answered, you there? But it was Li Yu's voice that came through. It was the first time he heard Li Yu's voice so obviously slurred, yet trying to maintain composure. It was clear he was drunk. His thoughts could barely keep up. Jen Suying knew too well this state of being drunk. He was sure Li Yu didn't even know what he was trying to say. Calling him was probably a decision made by the remnants of his rationality. After hanging up, he got dressed, rushed out of his hotel room, and drove at full speed to the destination. It seems this liberation has made the young people go wild. After the waiter took Jen Suying away, he woke Li Yu up. Despite Jen Suying holding his waist, there was no reaction. He whispered to send Suying back, you should worry about yourself. Jen Suying wickedly thought, in this state, you could even lose your virtue, yet you're concerned about others. Li Yu seemed reassured and hung his head. With Jen Suying's support, they reached the hotel. After closing the door, Jen Suying truly felt like a big bad wolf eyeing the rabbit on the plate. And thinking about Li Yu's temperament, the thought was incredibly enticing. Sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at Li Yu, thinking about him, he suddenly felt unsure how to proceed. And considering Li Yu's temperament, he'd definitely fight him upon waking up the next day. Jen Suying sighed, reached out to touch Li Yu's face, from his handsome eyebrows and eyes to his tall nose, and then to his soft lips. Then he felt the smoothness of his cheeks. As he continued to touch, the spark in young Master Jen's heart inadvertently turned into a blaze. Frightened, he quickly withdrew his hand, afraid that if he continued, he would end up unbuckling the other's belt. Jen Dashao felt extremely frustrated, so he rushed into the bathroom to take a cold shower. The desire in his heart was astonishing, wanting to possess this person entirely. It slowly filled him up, swelling to an uncontrollable and unbelievable extent. He was now somewhat confused about whether he wanted to conquer Li Yu or if he had truly started to like him. Jen Suying took off his alcohol-stained clothes. When he came out, Li Yu was still sound asleep, with one leg almost off the bed. Jen Suying went over to take off his shoes. He hesitated when he looked at his clothes. But sleeping with clothes on is so uncomfortable, he thought. He decided to undress him, planning to indulge his eyes and hands. Thinking so, Jen Suying really began to take off Li Yu's clothes. He was quite experienced in taking off a boy's pants. First, he painstakingly removed Li Yu's shirt and decisively threw it aside before starting to unbuckle his belt. Just as Jen Suying pulled down Li Yu's zipper, a cold voice suddenly came from above his head. "What are you doing?" At that moment, Jen Suying truly experienced the feeling of a thief caught red-handed. Blood instantly rushed from his head to his feet. He looked up to see Li Yu squinting at him, still somewhat intoxicated. However, Jen Suying noticed that his fist was already clenched. Li Yu was extremely exhausted, his brain sluggish, and he didn't have the energy to jump up and hit him. "Get off!" he warned in a deep voice, only hoping to keep Jen Suying at bay and deal with him in the morning when he sobered up. Jen Suying curled his lips into a wicked smile. "You look much cuter like this than usual. If only you were like this all the time," he said, slowly leaning down and propping himself up on his elbows. His face was almost touching Li Yu's and he gently kissed Li Yu's lips. Li Yu only felt his lips being lightly nibbled and pulled. Whether it was from exhaustion or not, he couldn't even muster the strength to bite back, allowing him to kiss him freely. Jen Suying kissed his lips, then trailed kisses down to his chest, gradually moving lower. Li Yu's body shook, his eyes widening in surprise for a moment. Li Yu struggled to sit up. With a casual push, Jen Suying pushed him back down. Jen Suying squinted at him, looking provocative. Provocatively, in an instant, his brain filled with blood. Practically watching helplessly, Jen Suying lowered his head again. Li Yu let out a quick, deep sound from his throat, feeling everything around him become unreal. He couldn't say a word, his hand instinctively touched Jen Suying's hair, fingers threading through his dark locks, silently conveying his plea. Li Yu's face was incredibly red, staring at him helplessly. Jen Suying glanced at him, wiped the liquid from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand, and mockingly laughed. Any man would go all out mentally when questioned and ridiculed about their abilities in that aspect. Li Yu was no exception, glaring fiercely at Jen Suying. But just one sentence from Jen Suying cut his momentum in half. He said, "What, you want to deny it after enjoying yourself?" Li Yu looked at himself, stark naked, and this scene of disarray excited him immensely. Jen Suying knew when to stop to avoid danger. Having taken full advantage, he dove onto the bed and fell asleep, planning to think of his next move upon waking. Anyway, he slept until the afternoon. Upon waking, he received a call from his brother as soon as he turned on his phone. "Where are you? Still at the hotel?" He also inquired about Li Yu's situation. The next day, Jen Suying arrived at the office and saw Li Yu with his back to him, talking to Secretary Liang. Jen Suying deliberately coughed, and both of them turned around simultaneously. Secretary Liang looked relieved. "President Jen, you're finally here. Look at this, we've been waiting for your response." Jen Suying took the document, glanced quickly at Li Yu, and went into the office first. Li Yu also followed him in. Jen Suying leaned against his large desk, pretending to be casual. "Have you read this report? Give me a brief description." Last time, the contract was well written. Li Yu tilted his head slightly, looking at him coldly. Jen Suying felt a bit guilty. "Let's discuss work during office hours, we'll talk about other things after work." Li Yu's expression changed suddenly and he rushed forward fiercely. Jen Suying's eyes widened as he was pushed hard and fell, half of his body lying back on the large table, causing his shoulder to swell and ache from the impact. His voice was not loud, but it was exceptionally cold. "For the sake of Sui Lin, this is the last time I'm giving you face. If you dare to provoke me again, I will make you regret it for the rest of your life." Jen Suying's anger flared up almost instantly, and he lunged forward intending to hit him. Li Yu dodged swiftly, grabbing his shoulder. A heavy punch landed squarely on Jen Suying's abdomen. Holding his hair and looking at him fiercely, "What disgusting thing do you still want to do to me? Let's hear it. I want to see how many lives you think you have." The two adjusted their facial expressions and scrambled together. Even though both were red-eyed from the fight, the scene appeared somewhat comical. They rolled back and forth on the thick wool carpet. "I just don't understand, clearly I was the one serving." Li Yu, moved my arms and legs, got Jen Suying up from the ground, and threw him onto the couch. Looking at him with disdain, he also cursed Jen Suying, grabbed the ashtray from the coffee table and threw it at him. Li Yu dodged swiftly. However, the water from the ashtray spilled all over him. Seeing himself in such a mess and thinking about what had just happened, Jen Suying got even angrier. Gritting his teeth, he jumped up from the couch, wanting to lunge again. Li Yu was prepared. With a push of his hand, he pushed him back again. From now on, wipe all that from your mind, Li Yu said, with Jen Suying becoming furious from embarrassment. Li Yu's undisguised disgust dealt an unprecedented blow to his pride. Being pursued to the point of disgust, he now decided to discuss Li Yu to death as a way to vent his anger. Li Yu's eyes shot fire, his thumbs pressing hard while his lips trembled. At this moment, he truly wished he could strangle Jen Suying. Jen Suying's face turned red from being choked, and with a forceful knee bump to his waist, Li Yu's pained expression froze, his grip loosening. Taking advantage, Jen Suying flipped Li Yu off the sofa, his foul mouth unleashed like a floodgate that wouldn't close. Me? What about me isn't exceptional? Look at this face. Everyone who's tried says it's good. Were you too quick yesterday? Like the Flash, huh? There mustn't be a problem. Maybe you should see a doctor? I know an old traditional Chinese medicine practitioner I could recommend to you. Li Yu's composure was gone, leaving only a provoked young man wanting to give his opponent a thorough beating to quell his raging anger. Although he initially approached Li Yu with a frivolous attitude, he realized after getting to know him that Li Yu was not just for show. Maybe he wanted to start a romance with Li Yu, but with the current situation, damn it, you actually dare to think. Damn it, you won't be able to develop anything. Nothing will come of it but anger and grief. He couldn't help feeling upset, with Li Yu already clenching his fists, trying to circle around to his side, the audacity of thinking you could. With Jen Suying following him in circles, the shameless scum couldn't catch himself. As the standoff continued, Li Yu's phone rang cheerfully. The ringtone, set especially for Jen Suying, jolted Li Yu back to his senses amidst the chaos. He fumbled to answer, his voice suddenly shifting from a tempest to a gentle breeze. Hello? Suying? Jen Suying was stunned. He suddenly felt that Li Yu was being too gentle with Xia Lindsay. Could it be that he liked Xia Lindsay? Li Yu tried to keep his voice steady as he asked, Suying, what do you want for lunch? He's brought you a lunchbox. Jen Suying shouted, lunchbox? Eat my foot. You still have the face to eat before finishing your work? Go drink the northwest wind. Li Yu angrily hung up the phone and strode over. Jen Suying was already in pain and not too keen on fighting to the death. Like walking a dog, he took Li Yu around in circles. Before long, a cautious knock came from the door, followed by Jen Suying's gentle voice. No matter what's going on, we should still have lunch.
You still have to eat lunch. Li Yu's face showed a trace of anxiety. He looked at himself and Jen Suying helplessly, fearing what he would do if Jen Suying came in at this moment. How could he explain? Jen Suying had also calmed down by this time. Looking at himself, fighting with a teenager in the boss's office, he also felt ashamed. The two hurriedly sent Suying away. Jen Suying glanced at Li Yu and sneered, what now? Li Yu coldly looked at him and said, what do you think? Jen Suying pointed inside. His office had a lounge and a bathroom. Li Yu knew there was no other way. With a bit of lingering anger, he walked into the bathroom. Jen Suying listened to the sound of water coming from the bathroom, feeling pain in several places on his body. Li Yu fussed in the bathroom for half an hour, which felt extremely long for both of them. Jen Suying didn't want to move at all, starting to regret his actions today. But after all, he was the one who first offended Li Yu. What he found most hateful was that Li Yu couldn't see clearly, not even recognizing such a perfect man as him. His eyes must have been smeared with dog shit. He walked over and knocked on the door impatiently. Are you done yet? Do you think this is a hotel room? Hurry up and get out. The sound of the hairdryer immediately stopped. Li Yu opened the door with a frosty face. Jen Suying sat on the boss's chair, looking at him arrogantly. I don't want to argue with you about the past, and I admit I did some things wrong. But the main reason is still your narrow vision. Li Yu's eyes slowly widened. From now on, let's forget about the past. From now on, we are just superior and subordinate. Li Yu thought this couldn't be better. Although Jen Suying knew what he was thinking, he still felt a bit disappointed. He waved his hand irritably. Fine, you go ahead and get busy. Go buy me lunch. That clay pot rice from last time was good, bring it back with the pot. Li Yu really wanted to slap him with his shoe sole but held back with all his might. In the end, he left without a word. Jen Suying watched his retreating figure, sneering repeatedly. He wasn't someone easily defeated. His words were merely to stabilize Li Yu first, a tactic to buy time. Li Yu's disdain fueled his defiance even more, intensifying his desire to conquer this challenge to prove his point. He hadn't left his office all afternoon, and it seemed everyone knew he was in a bad mood. Then Jian Suilin came in and said, "Brother, what happened? Why are you so angry? You're usually quite amiable towards Liu, who refused to speak." Jian Suilin looked at him doubtfully and said, "Brother, you look tired. Let me give you a shoulder rub." Jian Suiying yawned, relaxed his whole body, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Come on," closing his eyes. In the following days, Liu mostly gave Jian Suiying the cold shoulder, while Jian Suiying found new ways to trouble him every day. The month-long holiday quickly passed, and after school started, Liu didn't visit again, which disappointed Jian Suiying. However, his opportunity soon arrived on the eve of the National Day when he received an exciting call from Liu's elder brother, Li Xian. Li Xian had found a suitable place in Beihai and asked if Jian Suiying wanted to come and see. The timing of the call was perfect. Jian Suiying quickly agreed and expressed his intention to visit Li's family during the Mid-Autumn Festival, which Li Xian welcomed. The day before the Mid-Autumn Festival, Jian Suiying, along with Xia Lindsay, loaded a trunk full of gifts and set off to visit the Li family. Li Xian and Liu personally came out to greet them. They entered the house, laughing and talking. During the meal, Li Xian repeatedly expressed his gratitude to Jian Suiying for mentoring Liu. Jian Suiying took advantage of the situation to encourage Liu to continue his part-time job at his place during the winter snow period. After chatting in the living room for about an hour, Jian Suiying noted it was getting late and left with Xia Lindsay. On the way back, Jian Suiying suggested going to Guangxi with his brother. Jian Suilin habitually refused, still wanting to play in Guangxi with Liu for a couple of days, not willing to bring the tag along Xiaolin. Jian Suilin said, "We originally planned to go to Tibet during the National Day holiday, now Li Xian has invited you to Guangxi, Liu has to follow, so I have nothing to do. Brother, let me come with you." Jian Suiying said sternly, "It's not possible." Xiaolin pursed his lips, sneaking a glance at him, and softly said, "Brother, I see you and Liu have been quite unhappy lately. No matter what the reason is, don't fuss too much with him." Jian Suilin's words reminded his brother. He and Liu were in an awkward situation where they couldn't even speak to each other. Bringing Jian Suilin along might indeed ease the tension, so he agreed. The next day, Li Xian took Liu back to Guangxi. When the Jian brothers arrived, Li Xian arranged for them to stay in a guest house. The facilities were a bit old but very clean. Since Li Xian wasn't around, Jian Suiying immediately showed his true nature, looking at Liu with particular disdain. "Look at the dump you've arranged for me. It's small, old, and smells. Go open the window." In fact, Jian Suiying was deliberately making things difficult for Liu. He loved seeing Liu's look of suppressed anger. Jian Suilin quickly tried to mediate. "Brother, how about I go buy you a new set of bedding?" Although Jian Suiying was picky, he wasn't that pretentious. He snorted lightly, "No need. Xiaolin, I'm hungry." Liu said coldly, "There's a restaurant on the first floor. Tomorrow I'll treat you." "I don't know if Mr. Jian will agree." Mr. Jian of course disagreed. "What good food is there locally? I want something special." Liu replied stiffly, "It's my first time here too, I don't know." Jian Suilin quickly interjected, "Let's ask the driver from earlier." The driver was a local. Since there was nothing to do today, Liu suggested, "Let's stroll around like tourists." The three of them went downstairs and asked the driver, who stammered, "The weather is good, let's go to the beach for a barbecue." Jian Suiying didn't really care where they went. Jian Suiying didn't really have an opinion on where to go. He just wanted to oppose Liu, so he casually agreed. The three of them went to Silver Beach. The beach was crowded with people and very lively. Jian Suiying took a sip of beer first. The cold liquid flowed down his throat into his stomach, a perfect summer refreshment. He wanted to drink more, but Jian Suilin gently held the beer bottle. Seeing Jian Suilin's considerate and attentive manner, Liu felt incredibly jealous and his expression darkened. The better Jian Suilin treated Jian Suiying, the more Liu disliked Jian Suiying. He simply didn't know what to do to make Jian Suiying come to his senses. He recalled how they used to discuss in detail how to get revenge on Jian Suiying, how to make him suffer and be punished, how to make him taste the feeling of being bullied and humiliated. The fact that Jian Suiying had now forgotten him while he still remembered was quite laughable. It seemed like he was the only one who hadn't grown up. Liu felt a bit uncomfortable, lowered his head, and stayed silent. The table full of barbecue was quickly cleared by the three of them. They strolled leisurely along the beach for a while, getting further and further from the crowded places until there weren't even any swimmers left. Jian Suiying, feeling sleepy, lay down directly, and the other two also sat down. By this time, it was already getting dark. He felt rare leisure and comfort. Half asleep, he listened to Liu and Jian Suilin talking softly about everything, past school events, current school events, company projects. His mind started to get hazy, and he didn't know how long he was dozing off before he woke up again. He slightly turned his head. He found Liu lying right next to him, eyes closed. Liu's full lips were bathed in a kind of splendid glow that made him irresistibly want to taste them. The secluded corner of the beach and the dim light made the scene increasingly ambiguous and enticing. Jian Suiying's breathing became slow and cautious. Unable to control himself, he kissed Liu. Liu didn't react and continued to breathe steadily. Just as Jian Suiying felt he hadn't taken enough advantage and could go further, a chilling voice sounded above his head, scaring Jian Suiying almost to the point of jumping. He abruptly looked up to see Jian Suilin staring at them with a frosty face, incredulously. His voice wasn't loud, but Liu was very sensitive to it and instantly opened his eyes. It was like a shock to his brain. Piecing together Jian Suiying's past hooligan behavior, he instantly understood what was happening. Almost in an instant, he pushed Jian Suiying away and leapt up from the ground. Jian Suiying, somewhat infuriated and embarrassed, yelled, "What are you looking at?" Scram! No sooner had he spoken than Jian Suiying turned and ran. Liu glared at him fiercely and turned to chase after Jian Suiying, who also got up from the ground and kicked the sand around furiously, making it fly everywhere. After returning to the room and sitting on the bed, his mind was unusually clear. Letting Jian Suiying witness that scene was something he very much regretted. After all, Shaolinzi was his brother. It was not only embarrassing for Liu, but for himself as well. Soon, a loud knock on the door suddenly broke the silence of the dark, sounding exceptionally imperious. Angrily, he shouted, "Liu," his deep voice resonating outside the door. Jian Suiying blinked in the dark, weighed the pros and cons, jumped off the bed and opened the door. As soon as the door was opened, he suffered a fierce blow to the chest. He was about to shout landlord but was already pushed down to the ground by Liu, making him see stars. Jian Suiying couldn't see his expression, just smelled the scent of alcohol, and inexplicably felt a stifling pressure that made it hard for him to breathe. Both glared at each other, the atmosphere tense and ready to explode. Through gritted teeth, he said, "Today, I'll make you give up completely." Saying so, he charged forward in a dash, reaching out to grab Jian Suiying's collar. They fought and rolled on the ground, not knowing for how long. Suddenly, Jian Suiying felt something by touch. It was the light switch. Without thinking, he pressed it. Liu indeed let out a low cry without any defense, covering his eyes with his hand. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like a beast. The two of them wrestled together. Jian Suiying struggled to push him off while taunting him recklessly, "Take off your pants. I guarantee you'll be satisfied once and crave for more." Seeing that he couldn't break free, Jian Suiying saw Liu sitting on his stomach like Mount Tai. Jian Suiying, in a fit of rage, desperately thought about how to humiliate Liu even more. He began to tear at Liu's clothes. Liu was shocked. He really didn't expect that Jian Suiying, beaten half to death, would have the guts to do such a lewd thing. Liu shivered all over and grabbed his arm to pull him away. Jian Suiying then began to grope him wildly, accompanied by verbal teasing. He straddled Liu, feeling in his element. Liu, young and vigorous but inexperienced, his face turned pale and then flushed. "All you do is pretend to be serious and powerful." That comment hit a sore spot for Liu. It was his greatest humiliation. He was already losing his mind, and this added fuel to the fire. He became even more reckless, teasing through the pants. Liu ruthlessly grabbed Jian Suiying's hand that was acting presumptuously. Jian Suiying showed a provocative smile, skillfully teasing Liu with his fingers, slowly feeling him swell in his palm. Liu's eyes seemed to be filled with blood, and suddenly he thrust forward. A leg fiercely kicked the back of Jian Suiying's head. Jian Suiying didn't expect Liu to be so agile. This kick probably caused a concussion. In a daze, he felt Liu press his face down to the ground. Then he felt a chill in his lower body. In no time, Liu had stripped Jian Suiying naked, grabbed his scattered silk pajamas, and tied his hands behind his back. If he didn't deal with this beast Jian Suiying properly today, he would never forgive himself. He grabbed a bottle of the hotel's cheap shampoo. Jian Suiying was in pain, shock, and fear, trembling all over. His whole body was trembling violently, struggling desperately. At that moment, Liu watched him like a predator from above. Jian Suiying was in so much pain that he gasped for air and cursed until his voice went hoarse. But Liu turned a deaf ear, finding great satisfaction in this psychological stimulation. The torture of conquest and being conquered lasted a long time until Liu was completely exhausted. When Jian Suiying woke up the next day, Liu was already gone. He came to his senses and remembered what had happened at dawn. He felt as if he had been struck by lightning, unable to believe that someone had dared to force himself upon him. He was still lying on the ground without even a blanket, left exposed all night. Thinking about how he had been taken advantage of over such a trivial matter, he was so full of regret that he felt sick to his stomach, and rolled around on the floor in anger when someone cautiously knocked on the door. With his nerves on edge, Jian Suiying asked sharply, "Who is it?" There was a beep from outside, and standing at the door was Li Yu, who slowly walked in. Jian Suiying's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he glared at him, gritting his teeth and saying, "If I don't kill you, I'll take your surname." Li Yu could only use an expressionless face to hide his embarrassment, originally intending only to send Jian Suiying to the hospital. But in the end, it turned into such an utterly absurd affair, and he completely lost his reason. Life is a constant process of encountering and solving problems. He must resolve this matter before Sui Lin or his brother arrives. He rudely yanked the sheet off and threw it over Jian Suiying, then went over to help him up, not expecting Jian Suiying to throw another fierce punch. Li Yu covered his head, looking at him annoyed, wondering if this would ever end. Jian Suiying, like a monkey with its butt on fire, shouted fiercely, not knowing where his strength came from. He suddenly pounced on Li Yu, raising his fist to strike. Li Yu struggled to control him and quickly stopped him, his face so red it could drip blood, his voice hoarse, "Stop rubbing against me." Jian Suiying paused, feeling as if his old face was thrown to the parking lot below. He stubbornly kicked Li Yu with his foot, aggravating his injury, causing him to wince in pain. Li Yu picked Jian Suiying up, placed him on the bed, and threw medicine at him. "Apply some medicine, then I'll take you somewhere else. You can't let them see you like this." Jian Suiying, furious, kicked the anti-inflammatory medicine under the bed. "Letting you see is enough. You shameless rapist." Li Yu's face turned pale with anger and embarrassment. "You brought this on yourself. I warned you not to provoke me." Jian Suiying was so angry he could vomit blood, laughing in rage. "Li Lao, we've really made enemies now. Just you wait. I'll make sure you won't have a peaceful day for the rest of your life." Li Yu didn't take his threat to heart, mainly because Jian Suiying's current image was not intimidating at all. He picked up the ointment and threw it on the bed. "Are you going to use it or do you want to go to the hospital?" Master Jian grabbed the ointment and threw it directly at Li Yu's face. Li Yu, also holding back his anger, thought if only Jian Suiying's mouth wasn't so damaging, last night's incident might not have happened. He couldn't be bothered with him anymore and coldly said, "Call my brother now, tell him you had to rush back to Beijing for an emergency. I've arranged a car to take you to another hotel. I'll handle the rest." Jian Suiying knew this was the best solution for now but refused to make it easy for Li Yu, aware of his worry about his brother finding out about the incident. He was about to call his brother. Li Yuqi's face turned purple. The two of them were at a standoff, competing in patience and determination. Li Yu, after all, was young and in front of an old fox like Jian Suiying, couldn't help but blurt out a few words through gritted teeth. "What exactly do you want?" Jian Suiying had been waiting for just this sentence and immediately said, "It's simple. You take off your pants and let me have a go, and we'll be even." Just then, Jian Suiying's phone started to ring lonely in a corner. Li Yu picked up the phone, stared at the screen, and pursed his lips. Jian Suiying, seeing his expression, guessed it was Li Xian. Thinking that Li Yu was scared, he instead threw the phone directly to him. Now it was Jian Suiying who was unsettled and had no choice but to answer the call with a brave face. Li Xian's hearty voice came from the other end. Li Yu's lips curled into a cold smile as he watched foolishly. Li Xian decided to let Sui Lin handle the Chuancher matter, leaving Li Yu to Jian Suiying. After hanging up, he instructed Xia Linzi on matters concerning his apprentice, asking him to report back in detail upon his return. Li Yu pulled out 2 pieces of clothing from his suitcase and threw them on the bed, telling him to change clothes and set off. Jian Suiying didn't pick his head up and asked what he had said to Xia Linzi yesterday. As soon as this was mentioned, the small flame of hatred in Li Yu's heart was stoked again. He gritted his teeth and said, "You still have the face to ask. Go explain it to him." "Explain what? There's nothing between us." "It's all clear," Jian Suiying retorted, as Li Yu's face flushed intermittently. Jian Suiying grabbed the trousers and threw them at Li Yu's face. "Are you blind? Do these clothes even match? You can't even serve properly, what can you do?" Li Yu felt his blood pressure soaring just from interacting with him a bit longer. He retorted sarcastically, "Would being naked suit you best?" Jian Suiying, with his hair bristling in anger, yelled, "Can't you at least pour me a glass of water first?" Li Yu was stunned for a moment, looking at his swollen eyes, messy hair, and the fierce expression as if saying, "Come closer and I'll bite you to death." Suddenly feeling somewhat helpless, how tough exactly is Jian Suiying? It seems like losing the upper hand is harder for him than dying. After Jian Suiying finished drinking, Liu said, "Put on your clothes. I'll come to pick you up in a while." Jian Suiying, enduring the soreness all over his body, put on his clothes. When Liu came back, he handed him a hat and sunglasses. Jian Suiying saw in the mirror that his face was swollen like shubeiji, and he instantly lost his temper. He lunged forward, wrapping his arm around Liu's neck and choking him fiercely. He forcefully kneed the back of Liu's knee. Liu, walking ahead with a suitcase, was caught off guard. His knees buckled, and he knelt down. Liu seized the opportunity to twist Jian Suiying's arm and pushed him against the wall from behind. He leaned close to his ear and hissed, "Don't mess with me." He whispered threateningly into his ear, "Don't mess with me. I don't know what I'm capable of if you push me further." Jian Suiying's bones must be made of diamonds, utterly fearless. At this moment, Liu thought bitterly, if Jian Suiying had started off a bit softer, acting like someone who was pursuing, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so out of control. But now it was too late. Jian Suiying was right, they could never live in peace in this lifetime. After a standoff, Liu felt he had calmed down and let go of him. Then he opened the door and said, "If you still want to make a scene, let's take it outside, or just leave." Saying this, he picked up his suitcase and headed for the stairs. Jian Suiying was in so much pain he could hardly stand it, but he didn't want Liu to see. Clenching his teeth and straightening his back, he walked down. Liu, seeing his discomfort and his attempts to hide it, finally felt a twinge of guilt, placed the suitcase on the ground, and looked at Jian Suiying wanting to carry him. Jian Suiying gave him a look as if he was insane and continued walking by himself. Liu moved to his side and tried to support him. Jian Suiying swung his arm fiercely to dodge, and at that moment, completely lost balance and began to fall. Liu quickly caught him and pulled him up. Because of their positions, their faces were extremely close, nearly feeling each other's breaths. Liu's face started to heat up again, and Jian Suiying felt embarrassed once more. With a nasty tone, he said, "Where are you touching? Thinking of taking leftovers home, huh?" Liu quickly let go of the hand that was holding his waist and angrily said, "I was just trying to help you. Who needs your help? I have legs." After saying that, he managed to push him as he wished and continued limping downstairs. Once downstairs, they boarded the plane directly. Jian Suiying took a deep breath and then started fiddling with his phone, lost in thought. Usually, when he texts Xia Lindsay, he gets a quick reply. He's never had to wait this long. Could it be that yesterday's incident really shocked him? After pondering for a while and feeling somewhat guilty, although he doesn't like this younger brother, the Jin family still relies on this younger brother to carry on the family line. After thinking it over, he still made the call. The phone rang for a while before it was picked up. Jian Suilin's tired voice came through, admitting that he had been drinking. Jian Suilin quickly changed the topic and asked about drinking with Liu. Jian Suilin fell silent. His elder brother just wanted to explain yesterday's incident but was interrupted by Jian Suilin saying, "Do you really like Liu?" At this point, even if it killed him, he could not utter the words that he liked Liu, only offering a vague explanation. Jian Suilin suddenly became a bit agitated. "Brother, Liu doesn't like you." These words really hit Jian Suiying where it hurt. He roughly said, "It's just you kids always going on about likes and dislikes, you wouldn't understand even if I explained. Just forget about yesterday's incident. It's not a big deal." Jian Suilin paused and then asked, "Brother, do you mean you weren't serious either?" Jian Suiying was annoyed by the questioning. Now, any mention of Liu infuriated him, let alone having to discuss likes and dislikes with someone oblivious. He didn't have the patience for such affectation. Jian Suilin dared not speak further. After hanging up the phone, he felt even more irritable. Now even Xia Lindsay knew Liu didn't like him. It was truly embarrassing. Jian Suiying thought about the events of the past few days and could find no other words but embarrassing. Jian Suiying couldn't leave the house, feeling too sore to move. After a while, he started calling the front desk, asking for the best wine. After eating and drinking, they called for a massage. In short, they went through all the expensive services on the service list. He knew that Liu had a lot of pocket money and said that he would make him bleed hard these days. After all this, Jian Suiying, feeling bored, tilted his head and fell asleep. Half asleep, he suddenly felt someone calling him. He groggily opened his eyes and saw Liu standing by his bed. Liu's face didn't look good. "It's so early, and you're already sleeping like this. Someone from Qinhuangdao called you but couldn't get through, so he called me. He said there's progress." Jian Suiying quickly cleared his head and called back. The two talked on the phone for less than 10 minutes and hung up very satisfied. Then Jian Suiying naturally ordered Liu, "You handled this project too. You prepare the materials. All departments are on holiday now. These things can only be done after the holiday. Jian Suiying glared at him. The sooner after the holiday, the better. Li Yu's face turned dark, and he turned to leave. Where are you going? Do I need to report to you? You just threw me in the hotel and left. What do you want then? Didn't you enjoy the spending? Jian Suiying sneered. What? Heartbroken? You think it's free? I don't want money? Every time Jian Suiying used this to provoke him, Li Yu felt extremely uncomfortable and glared. You think you're selling yourself? Hearing this, Jian Suiying kept provoking Li Yu. Li Yu suddenly pounced on him, pressing him down on the bed. Jian Suiying pretended to be calm. His gaze seemed to carry warmth, making his body feel unnaturally hot. Li Yu strongly resisted this uncontrollable bodily reaction. Just as his nervous lips started to tremble, Jian Suiying suddenly hooked his neck and captured his lips. Li Yu felt his brain completely shut down. After Jian Suiying had kissed enough, he bit Li Yu's tongue. This pain woke Li Yu up, leaving him both embarrassed and annoyed. Jian Suiying lazily said, "Get lost." Li Yu really wanted to poke him a few times but held back. Why are you still standing there? Haven't had enough? Come up, and I'll satisfy you. Li Yu grabbed his arm and twisted it hard, flipping his whole body over, face down, pressing him onto the bed. Jian Suiying was now extremely anxious in this position and immediately shouted nervously, "What are you trying to do?" Li Yu got close to him, so close that his chest was pressed against Jian Suiying's back. Jian Suiying could feel his rapid breathing and the violent heaving of his chest. As if holding back great anger, Li Yu slowly said, "I'm warning you, this is the last time. Don't provoke me again." Jian Suiying wanted to curse him, but as soon as he opened his mouth, Li Yu quickly pulled a few napkins from the box at the head of the bed, stuffed them into his mouth, and then left him behind as he strode away. But from that day on, Jian Suiying had a new goal, which was to reclaim all that Li Yu owed him. More than a month had passed since the incident, and Jian Suiying always felt a void in his heart. One day, he didn't know why, but he just wanted to see Li Yu. He drove nervously to Li Yu's school and wandered around the vast campus, going in circles until he got lost. He pulled out his cell phone and before he could regret it, he dialed Li Yu's number. The call was quickly answered, but it wasn't Li Yu's voice. Li Yu was in the shower and couldn't answer the phone. After telling his roommate his intention, Jian Suiying sat on a stone bench waiting for the call. He ended up waiting and waiting, nearly half an hour passed, and got nothing. Jian Suiying knew Li Yu was not going to come. He felt both disappointed and angry, intending to drive away. Just then, the phone suddenly rang. Jian Suiying's heart skipped a beat as he saw Li Yu's name on the screen. He answered the call, and Li Yu's cold voice came through. "Where are you? I can't see you. Didn't you say you were at the East Gate?" "I'm here." It was then Jian Suiying remembered the casual lie he had told about being at the East Gate. Li Yu sounded impatient. "Then which gate are you at?" "I'm not at any gate," Li Yu said distinctly. "Jian Suiying," and then hung up directly. Without thinking, he hurriedly called back, dialing 6 or 7 times before Li Yu finally answered. "What's it? Haven't you had enough fun? I'm at your school, I'm lost, I don't know where I am." "Then why did you say you were at the East Gate?" "It takes me 15 minutes to walk from the dorm." A phone call would have solved everything. Li Yu asked angrily, "Why you came to my school if it's nothing important, just go back by yourself. Can't I come if there's nothing wrong? It's not like it requires a ticket." Li Yu snorted through his nose. "Go back." Jian Suiying, frustrated and agitated, demanded Li Yu to come pick him up immediately, or else he'd call his brother. Li Yu gritted his teeth and said, "Jian Suiying, you scoundrel." Then Jian Suiying quickly described his location. After a lot of difficult communication, Li Yu finally got a rough idea of where he was. He said, "You are too far away from me, I need to go back and get my car." "Just wait." Jian Suiying, tormented by mosquito bites, had no choice but to stay in the car. After a while, a Mercedes stopped next to his car. Li Yu casually closed his car door and walked towards him, frowning. "What exactly are you here for?" "I came to see how you're doing and to remind you that you still owe me one." Li Yu's face showed displeasure, and he turned to go back to his car. Jian Suiying grabbed his arm and started pulling. Li Yu felt incredibly annoyed inside. He shouldn't have come today. What was he thinking to actually come and see him? What good can come from meeting such a person? In the midst of their tugging, physical collisions were inevitable. Li Yu kept pulling back very reluctantly, not wanting him to touch him, avoiding him like the plague, which made Jin Suiying's face turn red with anger. Li Yu shouted, "What on earth do you want? Are you mad? Can't remember a thing? Why this endless pestering?" Jin Suiying angrily retorted, "I'll pester as much as I want. If you dare, dig a hole and bury me. The ground here seems fine, it'll take a while before anyone discovers. What nonsense are you spouting?" Jin Suiying pushed him hard against the car door, sealing his lips with a fierce kiss. As the saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt. Li Yu, having been forcibly kissed by the brute Jin a total of 3 or 4 times, should have been numb to it by now. But this time, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. After a moment of stiffness, he began to resist fiercely. Jin Suiying, while nibbling, mumbled unclearly, "What's wrong with you kissing me a few times? You've done worse things to me. You won't even let me have this small advantage. Is all the advantage in the world yours alone?" Li Yu's face turned red with effort, and in the midst of pushing and shoving, their bodies kept colliding and rubbing against each other. As Jin Suiying kept pulling, both their bodies suddenly stiffened. The atmosphere between them became incredibly awkward in an instant. Suddenly, Jin Suiying laughed out, bluntly teasing, "Li Zi, you're feeling it, aren't you?" Li Yu wished he could find a hole to crawl into. With his head down, he shook off Jin Suiying's arm, opened the car door, and was about to get in. It was just his bad luck. In his confusion, he forgot that he had just walked around from the other side and now was opening the passenger door. Jin Suiying, seizing the opportunity, immediately pinned him down on the seat. Li Yu felt as if a string in his brain had snapped. He knew he shouldn't have met with Jin Suiying today. Li Yu had nowhere to hide, because no matter how he moved, he had to touch Jin Suiying, and could only excitedly be manhandled by him. Jin Suiying was secretly delighted. He could too well understand the feelings of a virgin boy tasting forbidden pleasures for the first time. After all, which man hasn't gone through this? Jin Suiying's feelings were somewhat complicated. Actually, if Li Yu sincerely likes him, and one day gets the urge to be on top, it wouldn't be impossible to agree. After all, Li Yu is his favorite. To sum it up, he would absolutely not let Li Yu go. Jin Suiying gently rubbed that small patch of skin. He muttered, "Stop pretending to be righteous." Li Yu felt his heart was about to jump out of his chest, and all the blood in his body rushed to his lower abdomen. Suiying's constant teasing made his blood boil even more. Making a firm decision, he went all out. His hands that were initially pushing away changed direction, reaching directly into Jin Suiying's clothes from behind, caressing the soft, smooth back. When he took the initiative, he had to admit this was what he truly wanted to do. He fumbled to find the button to adjust the seat and flattened it in one go. The space instantly became much roomier. Li Yu was pinned beneath him, and they tangled their limbs like two hungry beasts, desperately trying to get more from each other. Jin Suiying's entire body flushed red, his neck slightly arched, and he let out low moans. Moaning softly, Li Yu opened his lust-filled eyes. What he saw was Jin Suiying's slender neck and the bobbing Adam's apple, prompting him to swallow. Driven by some desire, he began to slowly suckle. Jin Suiying groaned, shuddered as if stimulated, and then felt his stiff back ache, leaning onto Li Yu. Throughout this process, neither of them spoke a word until Li Yu reached into Jin Suiying's pants, snapping Jin back to reality. He grabbed Li Yu's hand, trying to reach further. Their eyes met, both filled with a mix of lust and a hint of embarrassment, especially Li Yu, whose gaze was hazy as if drunk. With his face flushed, Jin Suiying saw Li Yu's expression and felt his inner aggressor stirred. He grabbed Jin's nape, pulling his face towards him, and asked, "Why did you come to me?" Jin Suiying whispered, "I missed you." Li Yu then fiercely kissed him, taking advantage of his slight surrender, skillfully flipped over and pinned Jin beneath him. Jin Suiying reacted immediately, cursing, "Don't play the victim when you're taking advantage. Do you still want to take by force?" Li Yu, panting heavily, looked at him, his eyes full of restraint and desire. Rubbing his thigh impatiently, feeling a bit at a loss. Jin Suiying could feel that Li, this little virgin, definitely couldn't hold it in anymore. But no matter how uncomfortable he was, there was no reason for him to offer himself up. Knowing he couldn't beat Li Yu, it was impossible to take him head-on. Although it was quite frustrating, he could only push Li Yu's shoulder and pull their distance apart. "If you don't want to, forget it. I'm leaving." Li Yu was so angry he could grind his teeth to pieces, pressing his hand horizontally against his chest to stop him, making it impossible for him to get up. Furious, he said, "Jin Suiying, you bastard. You provoke me and then want to leave? Can't stand seeing me have a peaceful day? If you don't want to do it, why come to me?" Who says Jin Suiying didn't want to? He just wanted to be on top, that's all. Of course, he was rejected by Li Yu. Jian Suiying didn't understand the straight male way of thinking. Clearly, he was also quite enjoying it, but when it came to this, he started to fuss and wanted to leave. Li Yu pressed him down firmly, glaring at him with reddened eyes, not allowing him to leave. Jian Suiying looked at him, felt the hard, hot thing on his thigh, and suddenly thought that Li Yu was quite pitiful. He figured the kid was really pent up, wanting to force it, but without drinking he couldn't get past that mental barrier. If he didn't do it, he'd probably get sick from holding it in. Jian Suiying thought, what a joke I made for myself. How about appreciating it a bit longer? Li Yu also knew he was behaving like a desperate wolf. But once the desire was triggered, there's no way it could just be calmed down. So, Li Yu kept rubbing against him here and there, the little sparks making him itch and more hungry for it. Although Li Yu's technique was awkward, it couldn't hide the fact that Jian Suiying felt his intention to please him. This was a first-time breakthrough. Jian Suiying immediately softened, feeling quite useless. Li Yu sensitively sensed his softening, immediately leaned close to his ear, and whispered, "Let me do it, Jian." This soft and somewhat coquettish remark made Jian Suiying instantly surrender. Indeed, he felt somewhat reluctant to let go. Seeing Li Yu's distressed appearance made him confusedly willing to follow along. Li Yu was secretly delighted, having mostly figured out Jian Suiying's temperament. He's someone who can be coaxed but not coerced. The more aggressive you are, the more defiant he becomes, competing to see who can be more extreme. But once a gentle approach is taken, it can have an unexpectedly effective result. Jian Suiying somewhat regretted being so careless about showing up, but seeing Li Yu's several urgent attempts, he couldn't just kick him away. He could only grit his teeth and say, "I have it in my wallet." Li Yu was stunned for a moment, then rummaged through his pocket and pulled out the wallet. The temperature between the two soared like wild beasts. In Jian Suiying's brain, occupied by desire, a glimmer of clarity occasionally flashed through. His only thought at the moment was thankfully the car door wasn't shut tightly, otherwise, they'd be complaining about the lack of oxygen. It could have been all over just like that, which would definitely end up on the social news section. Too embarrassing. After they finished, while tidying up the aftermath with no one speaking in the car, Li Yu awkwardly wiped the seats with tissue paper. Jian Suiying turned his face away, his fingers stiffly trying to tie his necktie. He didn't know what was wrong today. He couldn't tie it properly after trying for a long time, which frustrated him so much that he yanked off the tie. After Li Yu glanced at him, he reached for the tie. Jian Suiying harshly said, "Don't bother. What's the point of wearing a tie in the middle of the night?" Li Yu pursed his lips and responded, "Better tie it anyway. Your front button is missing. Tying it will keep it from opening." Jian Suiying somewhat roughly pushes open the car door intending to get out, saying, "I like it open." At this moment, his shoe is only half on his foot, not properly worn, and the car is high off the ground. Suddenly, he trips. Just as he's about to fall face down, Li Yu catches him by the waist and holds him, whispering, "What are you getting angry about now? It's nonsensical." Jian Suiying is mad at himself for not resisting the little fox's temptation, leading him far astray and feeding the mosquitoes. Waiting in vain for over an hour, just to deliver himself to someone's doorstep. What kind of spirit is this? Li Yu looks at his open shirt and feels uncomfortable. However, he looks at it. He softly asks, "Are you hungry? Let's go have some late-night food." Jian Suiying, without turning his head, responds, "Not eating. Hurry up and get me out of here." Eventually, Li Yu drives him around and stops in front of a small spicy hot pot shop. He gets out of the car, knocks on his window, and says, "Have some. You've expended so much energy, you must be hungry." Jian Suiying retorts, "Don't flatter yourself. With your quick shooter speed, I don't feel tired at all." He unlocks the car and then forcefully drags Jian Suiying out. Jian Suiying glances at the small shop and his lordly illness acts up. He mutters under his breath, "You really have the nerve to bring me to a place like this to eat." Li Yu doesn't care and drags him towards the spicy hot pot shop. They pick a corner spot to sit down. Li Yu picks a beef ball with a skewer and brings it to his mouth. Jian Suiying squints at the beef ball for a long time. Jian Suiying squinted at the beef balls for a long time before reluctantly taking a bite. The taste was indeed very good. Jian Suiying thought to himself, "No wonder these students, with their young and healthy organs, love it." Li Yu said with a smile, "Suilin loves the spicy hot pot from this place. Every time she comes to see me, she insists on eating here at night." Jian Suiying snorted, non-committally. He was indeed a bit hungry. Finally, under Li Yu's encouragement, he also started eating heartily. In the end, both were so full they could barely move. When paying the bill, he saw Li Yu give the lady a 50, and his eyes widened as the lady gave back more than 10 yuan in change. Jian Suiying had never, in his life, experienced someone treating him to a meal that cost just over 30 yuan. Especially when this person had just lectured him. He couldn't describe his feelings in words. He couldn't outright say, "You're taking advantage of me, and that's it. Treating me to a 30-something yuan spicy hot pot meal at a street stall, aren't you ashamed? Do you have no dignity?" He was so frustrated. Though it's not right to compare, he just felt like his worth had been underestimated. Li Yu had absolutely no realization of this, and said, "Let me walk you out." Jian Suiying glared at him, then with a bang, slammed the car door. Li Yu watched him, puzzled. Jian Suiying followed Li Yu's car for a few minutes before seeing the gate he had entered through. He pressed the gas pedal and shot out of the school gate, leaving swiftly. Li Yu, seeing him leave without saying goodbye, was slightly stunned. Watching the car disappearing, he couldn't help but lick his lips. After returning, Jian Suiying was down for several days. While he was staring blankly at the computer screen, Xiao Linzi knocked on the door and came in. His brother adjusted his thoughts and returned to work mode. Suilin slowly put down the documents, his eyes fixed on his brother's neck. Jian Suiying noticed he hadn't left and looked up, asking, "What are you still doing here?" Shaolin awkwardly pointed to his brother's neck. Jian Suiying touched it, recalling there was a hickey there that would occasionally show. He adjusted his collar higher. Suilin took a deep breath and calmly said, "Brother, you haven't come home for dinner in a long time. Dad asked you to come back when you have time." After the reminder, Shaolin was about to leave but was stopped by his brother, who asked if he often went to see Li Yu. Jian Suilin was stunned for a moment, recalling that scene on the beach. After deliberating, he said, "We occasionally meet." Then his brother impatiently urged him, "Brother, you should find a girlfriend. Not worried about you stealing mine, but we need someone to carry on the family line. Don't let your brother delay you." Shaolin lowered his gaze without saying a word. Jian Suiying looked through his schedule and decided to go back on Friday. He called his brother again before he left, asking, "Do kids your age like to eat at those dirty street stalls?" The question was abrupt. Jian Suilin was stunned for a moment, then replied, "It's fine. Sometimes after playing basketball, a big group of us goes to eat. It's pretty fun." After Jian Suilin left, his brother sighed. He was 27 this year and suddenly realized that this might be the first time in his life he encountered a so-called emotional problem, and it was with a boy 7 or 8 years younger than him. On Friday night, he went home for dinner and had another unpleasant argument with his father. His father raised a bunch of questions about his recent investment directions, and their voices escalated as they argued. Jian Suiying went downstairs fuming, "Didn't watch my step," and kicked a large porcelain vase. He looked around and yelled at the people watching him, "Who put this junk here? Are you blind?" Jian Suilin and his mother's expressions changed drastically. On the drive back, the speed was visibly unstable compared to the screen. Feeling a bit unsafe, he parked the car by the roadside. He took out his phone and sent a text to Li Yu, asking what he was doing. Coincidentally, Li Yu was watching a movie online. Just a few meaningless words unexpectedly calmed Jian Suiying down. He forwarded a link to Li Yu. The video had an especially innocent title, but knowing it was from someone like Jian Suiying, Li Yu felt it wouldn't be something good. He turned down the volume before opening it. As expected, it was an explicit scene. Li Yu was stunned and quickly closed it, feeling guilty. Just then, another text from Jian Suiying came in, "Does that kid look a bit like you?" Li Yu knew Jian Suiying was being his usual obnoxious self and quickly replied, "I think it looks like you. You've got some good stamina." Jian Suiying felt a bit embarrassed, quickly replied with "Screw you," and thought to himself that he really brought this upon himself. Li Yu was getting more and more outrageous. Li Yu called. Jian Suiying initially didn't want to answer but eventually couldn't resist. Li Yu asked, "What did you mean by sending me that? And why have you been avoiding me these past 2 days? Are you scared?" Jian Suiying could never be afraid of Li Yu. Li Yu, tired of arguing with him, said he would fax over the project. But who knew that young Master Jian just wanted to see Li Yu and wouldn't accept the fax? Li Yu had no choice but to personally deliver it. The next day, after Jian Suiying left home, he drove to the barbershop to get a trim. He noticed a new boy working there, who looked very pretty, and called him over to cut his hair. After his haircut, Jian Suiying was stunned. Who was that fool in the mirror? Mr. Jian was furious, and just then, the manager arrived. No matter how much they tried to fix it, it didn't help much. In the end, Jian Suiying decisively went for a buzz cut. The boy, knowing he was about to leave, tearfully apologized to him. Jian Suiying gave him a look, found him quite appealing, and thought about having the boy follow him for 2 months. Li Yu didn't come until almost lunchtime, entering his office dressed in sportswear. Seeing his hair, she laughed. Jian Suiying was so angry he almost flipped the table. He had been wondering how to pick on her, and seeing her clothes, he got his chance. You dress like this to embarrass me at my company? Li Yu threw the documents on the desk and was about to leave immediately. Jian Suiying was even more angry. Li Yu really felt like she couldn't communicate with him. Seeing Li Yu not responding, Jian Suiying leaned back in his chair, leisurely flipping through the documents. Leaning back in the chair, leisurely flipping through the documents, and spending ages on a single page, Li Yu finally ran out of patience and said, "You look first, we'll get in touch by phone later." "I really have to go." But Jian Suiying simply wouldn't let him. Li Yu could tell that Jian Suiying was specifically looking to irritate him. He had no idea what he had done to offend him again. Li Yu immediately became uneasy. Jian Suiying finally finished flipping through those few thin pages, slapped them down on the table, and said, "Rewrite this." Li Yu had anticipated this, picked up the documents, and prepared to leave, but Jian Suiying stood up as well, attempting to persuade him across the table. Li Yu hesitated for a moment, then suddenly turned back, walked over to Jian Suiying, who was slightly stunned, went around the table, hooked his neck, and kissed him. This was the first time Li Yu took the initiative, leaving Jian Suiying completely dumbfounded, thinking he was dreaming. After being stunned for a brief 2 to 3 seconds, he immediately came to his senses and responded enthusiastically. While the two were caught up in the moment, a sudden knock on the door came from outside. It was Jian Suiying's cousin. In came a disheartened, battered, and bruised unfortunate kid. Jian Suiying felt a surge of satisfaction, thinking to himself who this was that had done what he had always wanted to do. He thought he should give him a big red envelope. As Zixinyu entered with a gloomy face and mournfully called him brother, Jian Suiying also glanced at Li Yu, deciding to spare this 20-something-year-old some dignity and let Li Yu leave first. After Li Yu left, Zixinyu stammered out his story. It turned out that the kid had lost over 3 million yuan betting on football and couldn't repay the debt. Jian Suiying was so infuriated that he sent Xiaolinzi out as well. He got up, walked step by step towards Zixinyu, rushed up in one quick movement, grabbed him by the collar, and pushed him against the wall. His stern gaze harshly cut through his skin. Zixinyu, terrified, begged for mercy. Jian Suiying, clutching his chin, said angrily, "Listen to me carefully. You should be thankful that you were born into a good family. If it weren't for your aunt, I wouldn't bother with you at all. If there's a next time, I'll let you fend for yourself. Even if someone makes a widow out of you, I won't care. Do you understand?" Zixinyu trembled like a sieve, tearfully looking at Jian Suiying. Jian Suiying planned to talk to his father. "I'll take you out for a meal." With confusion, he was half pushed out by him. Jian Suiying, after a tiring day, left the house after 8 p.m. When he went to visit his aunt and uncle in the afternoon, he felt that it had only been 2 months since he last saw them, but they seemed to have aged a lot. He was also quite upset, angrily thinking if he wasn't his cousin, he'd be the first to beat him up. When he was resting, he couldn't help but think of Li Yu and took out his phone to give him a call. The phone rang for a long time before someone answered. On the other end, there was the sound of Li Yu panting at a boxing gym. Jian Suiying decided to go and see what was happening. Arriving at Li Yu's training location, he stood at the entrance and watched Li Yu, his gaze lingering on his sweaty body. As Jian Suiying watched, he couldn't help but have a bunch of risque images pop into his mind, suddenly feeling something was wrong with his body. The janitor nearby noticed him and asked if he needed anything. Jian Suiying replied, "I'm waiting for someone." Their voices weren't loud, but the gym was spacious and quiet. Li Yu wiped his face with a towel and saw Jian Suiying. "I told you, once you're here, we're done. If it weren't for waiting for you, the coach wouldn't have singled me out for a lesson." Jian Suiying smiled slightly, squinting his eyes. When their gazes met in the air, a subtly intimate and warm atmosphere slowly emerged. Just then, the cleaner shouted at the door, "Remember to lock the door." Li Yu, still fixated on Jian Suiying, casually responded, "Okay." The venue suddenly quieted down to the point where one could hear a pin drop. Jian Suiying stretched out his finger and playfully hooked the back pocket of Li Yu's vest, saying, "Go take a shower, you're all sweaty." This sounded like a warm complaint between lovers. Li Yu's heart trembled. Jian Suiying, this old fox, has practiced this on so many people. That bold gaze of his not showing the slightest embarrassment. Li Yu slowly turned the door handle, then turned back and grabbed Jian Suiying's arm. He suddenly pulled him in. Jian Suiying was actually quite willing to shower with him. He meant, could he at least take off his clothes? This set was just bought yesterday, hasn't even been worn in yet, and it's not washable. Clearly, Liu wasn't so meticulous. Liu directly dragged him into the shower, turned on the water, and then pressed him against the wall and kissed him. At that moment, they were like wolves starved for days, desperately tearing at each other and pulling at each other's clothes. Liu first helped Jian Suiying into the car and then told him to leave. With a lazy look, Jian Suiying got Liu to drive him back to his place. Jian was weak in the knees and as soon as he entered the house, he collapsed on the sofa. He asked Liu to make something to eat. He hadn't had lunch or dinner and had engaged in such physically demanding activities. He was truly starving and quickly polished off the food. As soon as Jian Suiying put down his bowl, he pinched Liu's cheek and said, "To be Jian Suiying's wife, you've passed the cooking test." Liu laughed out loud, ignored him, and cleaned up after the meal. Jian Suiying was sitting on the sofa with his laptop, not sure what he was watching, staring blankly. Liu finished tidying up and came over to see that Jian Suiying was browsing a forum. Jian Suiying glanced at Liu. Suddenly, with a mischievous look, he asked if Liu wanted to see it. Liu sat next to him and said he would practice on him after watching. Jian Suiying gave him a sidelong glance, wanting to be on top this time. Liu disagreed, making Jian Suiying feel completely disappointed. Once again, he realized the difficulty of effectively communicating with a straight man. If it doesn't work this time, he'll find another opportunity next time. The long road of life, he didn't believe that he couldn't be on top of Liu at least once. Although he comforted himself with this thought, he still felt uneasy. Tossing aside the laptop, he got ready to go to the bedroom to sleep. After he lay down in the room, Liu also came in, slipping under the covers and hugging him from behind. Hugging him from behind, Liu's puppy-like flattery wasn't very clever, but it sweetened Jian Suiying's heart. Jian Suiying turned around and looked at Liu's pretty face. One thing led to another, and they got heated again. That weekend, the two spent an unusually wild 2 days without stepping out of the house. By the time Monday morning came and it was time to go to work, Jian Suiying felt as if he had had an extremely filthy dream. The dream was so embarrassing to recall, yet also endlessly memorable. A cold snap hit, and Beijing suddenly turned cold, marking the official start of winter. However, the relationship between Jian Suiying and Liu gradually warmed up. They began to interact like a typical couple. Jian Suiying was quite the fun-loving person, and with Liu, this poor student, he experienced many interesting things. Gradually, a few of Jian Suiying's close buddies noticed the ambiguity between them. The perceptive ones, unless they wanted to offend him, wouldn't gossip around. Sometimes after work, he would go watch Liu train, just to wait for him to finish so they could eat together. When he was good to someone, he did it properly, but if he was displeased, he would oppose Liu. Usually, these conflicts ended up being resolved in the bedroom. Their relationship was bumpy and hard to define. In the blink of an eye, nearly half a year had passed. As the year-end approached, Jian Suiying became increasingly busy, with his phone ringing almost every few minutes. When he saw that the caller ID was Jian Suilin, he didn't want to answer. In the end, he noticed Jian Suilin sent an urgent text message. As soon as he picked up the phone, Jian Suilin's tone was very unusual. With some hesitation, he said, "Brother, about the house you asked me to deliver to Director Fan and others, it's in a new development by Jian Suiying. I asked several people for help with the arrangements. When the launch was nearing, 4 houses were prepared to be gifted. He had tasked Jian Suilin with handling it and then he forgot about it. Unexpectedly, those 4 houses ended up causing problems. Yugu mentioned his parents were dealing with a hotel location issue, wanted to ask Director Fan for help and saw this as an opportunity to connect with him. He said he would deliver the houses himself and make another gesture of goodwill. Jian Suiying flatly refused and even reprimanded his brother. Before finishing his sentence, Suiying hung up the phone. Unexpectedly, 2 days later, he received a call from his aunt. On the phone, his aunt tactfully asked him to let Bai Sinyu handle the house matter with Xiaolin. She had personally called, and Jian Suiying found it hard to refuse, so he agreed. Liu was reading on the sofa at his house and upon hearing this, said expressionlessly, "Your cousin is big trouble. I think with Suilin's caution, this could be handled well. But since you've involved Bai Sinyu, any mistakes, you'll have to bear them yourself. Don't blame Suilin." Jian Suiying rolled his eyes at him, unconcerned. Liu turned a page, staring intently. "I also think there shouldn't be any problems, but since you mentioned it, I just voiced my opinion." Jian Suiying then hugged him from behind, asking him to rest his eyes, and pushed his book aside. He hooked his hand around Liu's neck, pressed down his head, and kissed him on the lips. Liu also cooperated by bending down and planting several kisses on his face. Jian Suiying suddenly felt energized, his hand sneaking under the clothes, frantically tugging at them. The two released their longing for each other accumulated over this period. On the evening of the 30th, Jian Suiying and Li Yu naturally went back to their respective homes. Facing a house full of relatives, Jian Suiying drank himself drunk. Eventually, he couldn't drink anymore and staggered as he walked. Jian Suiying blocked several drinks for him, helped him up, and explained to everyone at the table that my brother really drank too much. I'll take him inside to rest for a while. Xiao Linzi helped Jian Suiying into his own room and laid him on the bed. Jian Suiying felt some discomfort in his chest and spoke vaguely about the house matter in a semi-conscious state. Then, he faintly fell asleep on his brother's bed. Not knowing how much time had passed, it seemed he fell asleep. Jian Suilin hadn't seen his brother sleep so unguardedly in front of him for a long time. If he knew what thoughts he harbored for him, he probably wouldn't even dare to close his eyes. Jian Suilin's hand moved from his hair to his forehead, his fingertips lightly dancing on his face like feathers, from the center of the eyebrows to the nose, and finally to the lips. Jian Suiying's lips always seemed very soft. Jian Suiying's heartbeat suddenly quickened. Looking at those slightly parted lips, he felt an immense longing. He softly called out brother with no response. Then, he grew bolder, slowly leaned down, and pressed his lips against his brother's. In that moment, he even stopped breathing. He dared not make any move, for fear of waking Jian Suiying. Just as he hesitated whether to stop or to boldly continue exploring, Jian Suiying suddenly mumbled. Suddenly, he reached out to hook his neck. Jian Suilin's head was pushed down uncontrollably and they kissed intensely. Jian Suilin's eyes widened, he felt his heart almost jump out of his throat. Almost breathless, daring not to breathe heavily. In his tension, he heard his brother saying something. He was saying two words, someone's name, Li Yu. The moment Jian Suilin heard it clearly, a sincere anger and jealousy instantly filled his entire being. Jian Suiying woke up the next day with a splitting headache. Suddenly, he remembered something and started to get up and look for his phone. He turned on his phone to find over 20 missed calls and messages. Not a single call was from Li Yu. He scrolled through the messages and finally saw Li Yu's name. He opened it and was instantly disappointed. Li Yu had sent him a New Year's greeting message, clearly one of those forwarded texts. Besides that, Jian Suiying also felt conflicted. But he just didn't feel comfortable. Usually, Jian Suiying would only call him Li Laor when he was looking for trouble. As soon as Li Yu heard that, he knew something was up. Jian Suiying questioned Li Yu about why he didn't call to wish him a happy new year last night. That tone made Jian Suiying feel like he was being an unreasonable, complaining woman, which made him even more upset. But he thought that continuing the conversation would just make it seem even more like that. He was caught in that uncomfortable spot between feeling pretentious if he spoke and feeling stifled if he didn't. He was so angry he couldn't say anything for a long time and finally just hung up the phone. Jian Suiying lay in bed for a while longer before lazily getting up to wash and eat. When he went downstairs, his dad was reading the newspaper. Seeing him come down, his dad laughed and said, "Suiying, how long has it been since you drank? You were out so quickly last night." "Mostly because they kept toasting me." "It was too much," Jian Suiying said, rubbing his head and planning to visit his grandfather again on the third day of the new year. His grandfather didn't like Jian Suiying and would often ignore him. He knew that Jian Suilin probably didn't want to go either. But this time, to his surprise, Jian Suilin unusually wanted to go see their grandfather together. Jian Dongyuan was quite happy about it. Jian Suiying seized the moment and said he planned to take Xiaolin to pay a New Year visit to the Li family. Thinking of Li Yu's always calm and indifferent face made him feel both love and hate. That night, he took Xiaolin to the Li family for the New Year visit. Li Xian led the two brothers from the Jian family to the guest room, which made Jian Suiying feel much more relaxed. After some small talk, Jian Suiying got to the point and started discussing the land deal. After chatting for a while, they reached an agreement. At that moment, Li Yu suddenly chimed in, saying, "After my brother leaves, I'll be responsible for the contact work regarding this matter." Jian Suiying glanced at him and couldn't resist kicking him under the table, then pretended nothing happened and smiled, "That works too. It'll be more convenient for you to contact your brother. Keep me updated on any progress with this project." Li Yu looked somewhat embarrassed and gave Jian Suiying a deep look. He retracted his legs a bit. Jian Suiying slightly tugged at the corner of his mouth, amused by his earnest appearance, and felt a particular urge to tease him. The two were sitting face to face, making it convenient and discreet for Jian Suiying to do all this. Li Yu gave him a warning glance. While pretending to taste tea with Li Xian, Jian Suiying boldly stretched out his foot, rubbing it against the inside of Li Yu's thigh. Li Yu's body shook, and an awkward expression appeared on his face. Li Xian glanced at him. "What's wrong with you?" Can't you sit still on such a big chair? Jen Sui-ying chuckled softly, quickly winking at Li Yu. Li Yu glared at him. That brief moment of eye contact was very short, yet Jian Suilin sensitively caught it. Seeing Li Yu's cautious appearance, Jen Sui-ying lost the mood to tease him further. After sitting for 2 hours and seeing it was about time, they decided to leave. Li Xian initially planned to see them out, but just as they reached the door, his phone rang. So, Li Yu ended up seeing them off. When they reached the car door, Jen Sui-ying opened the driver's side door and put Xiao Linzi inside, then pulled Li Yu to move aside. Li Yu reacted as if he were electrocuted, suddenly shaking off his hand. Jen Sui-ying looked at him in surprise. Li Yu's expression was stiff, and he glanced sideways into the car, speaking in a deep voice, "What are you doing?" Jen Sui-ying felt upset inside. "Can't I speak a few words with you?" Li Yu pursed his lips, his eyes showing clear rejection. Jen Sui-ying also knew that he was doing this to avoid suspicion and eventually compromised. Jen Sui-ying passed by him and got into the passenger seat. Looking ahead, she told Xiao Linzi to go home. From the rearview mirror, Jen Sui-ying glanced at the tall and handsome young man, self-cool as frost. Feeling upset, Jen Sui-ying lay down in bed early, intending to sleep. She didn't know how long had passed when she was suddenly awoken by the ringing of her phone. It was Li Yu inviting her out tomorrow. Jen Sui-ying really hoped to meet Li Yu tomorrow, but she had already arranged to visit her grandfather for the new year, which couldn't be delayed. She suggested meeting now instead. After hanging up, she jumped out of bed, excited to get intimate with Li Yu soon. She couldn't wait to fly back to her apartment. This little Li Yu was really enchanting, mesmerizing her like this. Li Yu entered, bringing a chill with him. Jen Sui-ying walked over, frowning as she touched his red ears, feeling the cold. Li Yu slowly pulled away her hand. Staring at her, he said, "You know what our relationship is. It can't be public. You're old enough not to be so frivolous." But what was the meaning of today? Aren't you afraid they might notice something? Jen Sui-ying chuckled, thinking it wasn't a big deal to get angry about. Li Yu, however, did not smile. His expression was very serious, feeling it was not a small matter. Remembering the questioning look in Jian Sulim's eyes, he still felt uncomfortable all over. Jen Sui-ying irritably wanted to slap him. Li Yu gave him a fierce look, zipped up his coat forcefully, turned around, and was about to leave. Jen Sui-ying grabbed his clothes and angrily said, "You come back here. Is it that I have to apologize to you?" Li Yu, with a cold face, looked at him. "Have you ever thought about me? I still have my dignity." This completely infuriated Jen Sui-ying. He suddenly yanked Li Yu by the collar and pressed him against the door, angrily saying, "Who are you saying has no dignity? Say that again." Jen Sui-ying moved closer, squinting his eyes and said, "Li Lao Er, are you on your period? I can't see this as a big deal. Why are you fussing about it with me? Can't I judge the severity myself? It was just a joke. Do you find this amusing?" Li Yu's eyes were filled with rage. Jen Sui-ying realized he was truly angry. It had been a long time since he had seen Li Yu like this, so he reflected on himself. Jen Sui-ying sighed and loosened his grip. In a soft voice, he said, "Forget it. Little Li Zi, let's not fight anymore. It's New Year's, can we get along peacefully?" A flicker of surprise passed through Li Yu's eyes. Jen Sui-ying taking a step back was as if the sun had risen from the west. He was dumbfounded for a moment. He had prepared what to say before coming. Before he came, he had already prepared what to say, but it got stuck in his throat at this moment. Jen Sui-ying brushed his lips slightly, and Li Yu was actually sweating. He was half pushed and half allowed as Jen Sui-ying took off his coat. Li Yu felt a difficult to describe sensation. He glanced at Jen Sui-ying and then looked away. Jen Sui-ying was still hiding in front of Li Yu, pressing his forehead against his, ambiguously asking, "Did you miss me these past few days?" Li Yu looked at him without speaking. Jen Sui-ying put his hand inside his clothes, stroking his back, lightly pecking his lips and saying in a hoarse voice, "Come on." Li Yu turned around and pushed him against the opposite wall, fiercely blocking his lips, sucking rough and hard. They seemed to have endless energy. As soon as they touched each other, it easily ignited them. Li Yu was a bit urgent today, not doing much foreplay, making it very uncomfortable for him. Jen Sui-ying cried out to be gentle, but Li Yu acted like he didn't hear, making it unbearable. He gritted his teeth and endured. Even if he was slow, he could feel that Li Yu was doing it on purpose. By the time Li Yu finished, he was already a bit unclear, lying hazily on the bed. After a while, he heard the sound of water flowing from the bathroom. Li Yu came out dressed, intending to leave. Jen Sui-ying felt a strange feeling in his heart. He climbed out of bed, asking Li Yu to make something to eat, but Li Yu insisted on leaving. Jian Suiying lit a cigarette, his hands trembling. You played with me for 3 hours, and making a meal for me is too much for you? Li Yu paused for a moment, then silently went to the kitchen. A while after, he brought in a bowl of noodles. Jian Suiying looked at the bowl, the steam rising from it stinging his eyes. With a forceful wave of his hand, he threw the bowl of noodles all over Li Yu. Li Yu was stunned for a moment, then grabbed Jian Suiying by the collar, wanting to hit him. But when he caught Jian Suiying's eyes, his fist, raised in mid-air, couldn't come down no matter what. Jian Suiying said in a low voice, Li Yu, you're really worthless. Li Yu slowly let go of his collar and said what he had been wanting to say all evening, let's end it here. Jian Suiying's eyes were bloodshot, and he looked at him with clenched teeth. He was too upset to speak at the moment. Li Yu couldn't bear to meet Jian Suiying's gaze and ran off, grabbing his coat. Jian Suiying was stunned for a long time. Then, he violently swept all the decorations off the bedside table onto the floor. The next day, Jian Suiying overslept, woken up by a call from his dad. He and the driver set off immediately. Jian Suiying sat in the seat with his arms crossed, resting with his eyes closed. He had hardly spoken since coming back home. Xia Lindsay glanced at him questioningly several times and finally couldn't help but ask softly, Bro, where were you last night? Jian Suiying could tell his brother was in a very bad mood. But most of the time, when his brother was in a bad mood, he tended to vent on everything around him. Being so silent was indeed very rare. Jian Suiying truly couldn't accept it. Since Li Yu had turned his back on him like this, there was no need to be polite anymore. Upon reaching his grandfather's house, Jian Suiying told his grandfather everything he had been doing recently. As he spoke, the old man eventually brought up Li Yu. Upon hearing his name, Jian Suiying felt a sense of constipation, both oppressed and aggrieved. The old man glanced at him, sensing there was more to it. Jian Suiying mockingly thought to himself that if he were to speak the truth, the old man would probably cough up blood. He forced a smile and casually mentioned that Li Yu had been injured and kept asking. Jian Suiying leaned in and whispered that the young man's thing seemed not to be working well, and he was looking for doctors everywhere for treatment. The old man's eyes suddenly sparkled, and he lowered his voice, ignited with the spirit of gossip. He then expressed his pity. Initially, Jian Suiying was just speaking off the cuff for the sheer enjoyment of it. However, upon second thought, he figured it would be best if the news of Li Yu's problem spread throughout the entire capital to see who would dare to set him up with someone after that. The next morning, Jian Suiying drove himself to check on his hotel project. Looking at the empty, desolate construction site with no sign of life, he felt hollow and uncomfortable. He remembered the last time he was there with Li Yu, discussing his project plans back when they were just superior and subordinate, and Li Yu was still polite to him. Who would have thought that in just a few months, they would go from being familiar to nothing at all? Just as he got home, he received a phone call. It was from the barber shop owner, bringing up something about Xiao Zhu from half a year ago. Jian Suiying remembered there was a pretty boy he wanted to take care of, but the boy wasn't interested. At that time, Jian Suiying was also deeply involved with Li Yu, so he didn't pay much attention and quickly forgot about it. Now he couldn't even remember what the boy looked like. Now that the boy had agreed, he was coming over soon, and then he heard a knock on the door. The boy lifted his head, revealing a fair and handsome face. Jian Suiying sat on the sofa, looking at him with a half-smiling expression. Xiao Zhu came over and whispered, Happy New Year, Jian Xiao. He could feel Xiao Zhu was particularly nervous, so he reassuringly patted his back and casually asked, How old are you? 19, about the same age as Li Yu. But he looked younger than Li Yu, almost like a middle school student in the crowd. That night, Jian Suiying had his way with the boy and was quite satisfied with him. The boy had a beautiful body and wasn't talkative. Thinking back on the past half a year, constantly mixing with Li Yu, he hadn't tasted this kind of dominance in a while. So, he sincerely felt that he had treated Li Yu very well, but unfortunately, Li Yu still didn't appreciate it. Seeing the boy's legs trembling, getting out of bed to find him a lighter, he felt a bit of pity. The boy lit his cigarette and stood obediently. Jian Suiying hugged his waist and got him back into bed. Rest now, I won't bother you anymore. Xiao Zhu was relieved. He carefully curled up and lay down. Jian Suiying took a puff of his cigarette, stroked Xiao Zhu's soft hair, and said, I'll be leaving first. You can stay here as long as you like. I'll call you when I'm free. As soon as Jian Suiying arrived at the office, he called Secretary Liang to ask about Li Yu's schedule. Ask him how Li Yu's schedule shifts. Secretary Liang is a bit unusual, everyone in the company knows. Li Yu and Jian Suilin are like their boss, they come to work when they don't feel like it. There's basically no fixed schedule. After Secretary Liang left, Jian Suiying squinted and thought for a long time before making a phone call to get some special medicine from a friend. After hanging up, he showed a nasty smile. Secretary Leon usually takes good care of Liu, even calling him sister. Being so ordered by him, he urged daily. Reluctantly, Liu had no choice but to show up. Jian Suiying called Liu to his office. Liu was holding the materials he was supposed to show him. Jian Suiying sat back in his chair with his legs crossed and his chin up, looking at him proudly. Liu also stole a glance at Jian Suiying and felt he had to be extra cautious even when breathing. Previously unaware, he now felt the office, though spacious, was completely filled with Jian Suiying's presence. His scent was a mix of rough tobacco, refreshing aftershave, and a faint hint of perfume, indescribably wild and sexy. Between every one of his sinister smiles and his domineering, arrogant gaze, it was diffused to the extreme, making it impossible to take one's attention off him. No matter how much you hate, despise, or dread Jian Suiying, you can't stop your eyes from following his every move. With every word he says, he possesses all the traits that make him likable, yet paired with a temperament that can be intensely frustrating. He's a living contradiction, someone you love and hate in equal measure. Jian Suiying casually flipped through the stuff he brought over. He hummed through his nose and tossed it aside. You were supposed to go to training today, right? Liu nodded. But you probably can't go today. Liu looked up, frowning. What do you mean? Jian Suiying stood up. Shouldn't we settle our personal grudges? Liu instinctively took a step back, watching him warily. It's not his fault that every time he disagrees with Jian Suiying, he has to be on full alert like a young lady. It really is because Jian Suiying could behave like a hooligan anytime, anywhere, recklessly. Moreover, he feared that Jian Suiying's provocations might also infuriate him, leading to even more uncontrollable situations. He still remembers that he was in an office building with dozens of people outside, his lonely and boring heart always waiting for free excitement. Seeing Jian Suiying, he got angry. Do you think I, Jian Suiying, am a rubber ball that you can kick whenever you want? Let me tell you, it's not that easy. Liu felt that continuing this way was risky. He looked at him carefully and said, Brother Jian, we are not suitable together, it's risky. Jian Suiying pointed at him and said, Shut up, I don't want to hear this nonsense. Liu looked at him, how about Li Laoer? We've been getting along fine for so long. You say it's over just like that? I feel really suffocated. Have I been serving you for half a year for nothing? Do you really think there are so many good things in the world? So what do you want to do about it? Just pull down your pants and honestly sleep with me once, and we can write off our grievances. From now on, I absolutely won't bother you anymore. Liu's breath was a bit unstable. He forced himself to speak calmly. I've said it before, I can't adapt. Stop thinking about it. I can't adapt. How am I supposed to act superior by birth? Let me tell you, this is what you owe me. Liu felt that he could no longer continue talking to Jian Suiying. Continuing would make him lose his sanity, which was too dangerous. So, he could only face Jian Suiying and step back toward the door. Jian Suiying also pressed forward, his facial expression extremely ugly. After walking a few steps, Liu stopped. Jian Suiying, who had been keeping his hands behind his back, suddenly reached forward. Holding something in his hand, in his moment of shock, he suddenly sprayed it on his face. Liu smelled a pungent odor, and immediately felt dizzy and weak in his limbs. He looked at Jian Suiying incredulously, his eyes filled with anger and anxiety. He never dreamed that Jian Suiying would resort to such despicable methods. Before losing consciousness, he thought he had overestimated Jian Suiying. Jian Suiying was breathing heavily, watching Liu collapse on the ground with sweaty palms. After several experiences, he knew he couldn't beat Liu physically, and always ended up at a disadvantage, so he had to find another way. But seeing Liu lying on the ground with a look of unwillingness, he felt a bit lost. He dragged Liu up from the ground. After dragging him into his lounge and throwing him onto the bed, Jian Suiying broke out into a sweat. Liu looked thin, but his muscular body was heavy enough. Plus, with the added weight from winter clothing, moving a grown man weighing over 100 pounds a significant distance was bound to make anyone breathe hard. As he sat on the edge of the bed to rest, he watched Liu's tightly closed eyes and brows. No matter how he looked, he found him exceptionally handsome and beautiful. Where should he even start? Young Master Jian was worried. Although he had managed to overpower Liu in one go, now he lacked the courage to continue. Even though he truly wanted to be with Liu, what he desired was for both of them to passionately and eagerly crave each other, a vigorous and exhilarating sexual momentum, not a one-sided venting of revenge. Even though this was his initial thought, at the crucial moment, he found himself unable to proceed, not even slightly inclined. Having lived for so many years, this was the first time he knew he could be afraid of something. He feared the look of disgust and hatred in Li Yu's eyes if he were to wake up. Li Yu already disliked him. It seems that if he really went through with his actions, Li Yu would probably hate him for a lifetime. All things considered, thinking that he might completely destroy his relationship with Li Yu made him back off. He genuinely liked Li Yu and wanted to have a good relationship with him. Although he felt Li Yu was hateful and infuriating, he never deceived himself. He liked Li Yu, and even if Li Yu annoyed him to this extent, he couldn't change his feelings. What should he do? Jin Suiying slowly leaned down, kissed Li Yu's lips a few times, and then raised his head again. Then he lifted his head, forcing himself to stay alert, letting Jin Da's ruffian heart be as it may. He could now sense a bit of melancholy and sorrow. Jin Suiying was conflicted for another half hour. He knew he had really messed up this time. If someone asked him how the medicine worked later, he figured he would probably blush. Just as he was sighing, Li Yu's phone rang and Jin Suiying was startled. The caller ID showed it was the coach. He remembered that today was Li Yu's training day, but he didn't care and just hung up. Unexpectedly, the coach was persistent, kept calling back every time he hung up, insisting tirelessly. Exasperated, Jin Suiying simply turned off the phone. He covered Li Yu with a blanket and left the resting room, sitting at his desk in a daze. After a while, Secretary Liang came in, handed him some documents, and then looked around the office suspiciously, as if he had something to say but hesitated. Jin Suiying glanced at him and asked, "What's up?" Only then did he remember that he had seen Li Yu enter his office and he hadn't come out for almost 2 hours. He coughed and said, "Li Yu is using the bathroom inside." Secretary Liang was skeptical but dared not say more. Others in the company might not know about the ambiguous relationship between Jin Suiying and Li Yu, but as the secretary who interacted with Jin Suiying the most, he had observed them too often. He knew very well about the time when Li Yu stayed in his office all afternoon without leaving. Tapping his fingers on the desk, he said, "Go get us some food and don't worry about anything else." The medicine really was effective. Until the afternoon, when everyone in the company had left, Li Yu still hadn't woken up. If not for his even breathing and the fact that he seemed to be sleeping soundly, Jin Suiying would have considered taking him to the hospital. With Li Yu unconscious, he couldn't leave and had to stay. Eventually, he couldn't stand it anymore. Tired and hungry, he thought of his own distress throughout the afternoon. Feeling utterly frustrated. He didn't know whether he was angry at Li Yu, but he became increasingly irritable. He grabbed Li Yu by the collar and slapped him twice, the sound echoing loudly in the resting room. "Wake up! Do you think this is your home? Addicted to sleeping, huh?" Initially, Li Yu did not respond, so Jin Suiying slapped him several more times. Slowly, Li Yu began to wake up. Jin Suiying looked down at him as Li Yu's gaze shifted from confusion to clarity over half a minute, during which Jin Suiying kept watching him. Watching him slowly turn his head, he glanced at the pitch-dark window, then slowly turned back, staring fiercely at him. Jin Suiying was somewhat shocked and it was too late to step back. Li Yu jumped up from the bed and pushed him violently. Jin Suiying was pushed directly to the ground, hitting the back of his head against the wall, cursing furiously, "I haven't even touched you yet, are you looking for death?" Li Yu's face turned pale, he raised his hand and swept the lamp off the bedside table onto the floor, his fingers trembling as he pointed at him. "I have a match today, Jin Suiying, why don't you go die?" Jin Suiying was stunned, the phrase "go die" echoing in his mind. He felt as if part of his body was being burned, painfully scorching. He violently jumped up. "What does your damn match have to do with me? You deserve to miss it. If you had just let me have my way earlier, none of this would have happened." Li Yu, trembling with rage, dealing with someone like Jin Suiying, talking about team spirit and honor, sweat and dreams, he surely sees them as worthless. And Jin Suiying not only destroyed his long-term efforts, not only did he not care, he was still arrogantly dismissive, not taking the matter seriously. He should have understood Jin Suiying's nature long ago. He couldn't understand why he had been able to put up with such an unreasonable, arrogant person, full of unbearable flaws, for so long. Physically, he felt no discomfort, knowing Jin Suiying hadn't really harmed him, but being drugged and stripped, and also having his important plans disrupted, he really wanted to beat Jin Suiying up secretly. But in the end, he restrained himself, picking up his clothes and putting them on one by one, while Jin Suiying unrelentingly fiddled with things nearby, and accidentally grabbed a cup with water in it. Without thinking, he splashed the water at Li Yu. Just as Li Yu had put on his cashmere sweater, he got splashed all over. Although the room was heated and not cold, wearing these wet clothes outside would surely freeze him to death. Li Yu glared at him viciously, grinding his teeth. "Jin Suiying, it's you who should go die." Jin Suiying glared back at him. "Li Yu, you're the one who should die." Li Yu was desperate to pounce on him and bite him to death. He had always had a calm personality since he was young and rarely blushed in front of others. But every time he encountered Jian Suiying, no matter how much he forced himself to stay calm, he would end up furious. Liu simply took off his clothes, put on his down jacket with bare arms, and strode away. Jian Suiying glared at him fiercely. "I didn't know you had a match," he said, his voice growing smaller. Liu glared at him and walked past him with a stern face. Jian Suiying called out behind him, "Besides, what's the big deal?" Liu walked away without looking back. Jian Suiying had been very upset these past 2 days. Ever since their unpleasant parting last week, he had been particularly agitated and had no idea what to do. He really wanted to find Liu, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, so he just idled away the time. Although it wasn't great that he had delayed his match, he didn't feel guilty. At most, he felt a bit uneasy. One night, he received a call from Director Fan, inviting him to dinner. Having nothing else to do, he went. He thought Director Fan would bring a few more people to socialize, but it turned out to be just the two of them. Jian Suiying was a bit surprised, knowing that Director Fan had something to say. So he calmly sat down and drank with him. After 2 drinks, Director Fan spoke, "Brother Jian, I invited you here today because I indeed have something to say."